You're live.
Okay. Good evening, everyone. I'm William Johnson, Chair of the Baltimore County Blue Ribbon Commission on Ethics and Accountability. It's my pleasure to welcome my fellow commissioners and members of the public who are viewing the session to this meeting of the Baltimore County Blue Ribbon Commission on Ethics and Accountability. And let me wish a very happy new year to everyone as well. During this meeting, we will have time to discuss outstanding concerns with representatives from Baltimore County. We will decide on the report and the language of draft recommendations to be included in our interim report to the county, which is due on Tuesday. We will continue discussing what our commission members have learned from our fact-finding work and potential recommendations. As in previous meetings, I would like to remind everyone about our housekeeping items. This session is being recorded. The agenda for tonight's meeting was shared with members of the commission directly and is posted on the commission's website, which is www.blueribbonethics.ubalt.edu. This meeting is scheduled to conclude at 8:30. If we cover the agenda items before then, the meeting will close early. All agenda, minutes, meeting links, and commission materials will be posted on the commission's website. We will not be responding to comments or questions posted in the chat. Questions or comments can be shared with the commission by email at blueribbonethics@ubalt.edu. Commission members will have the opportunity to ask questions or comment during the meeting and can do so by raising your hand or using the raise hand function in Zoom. And so to get started, we want to do a very quick review of minutes of the previous meeting. Those minutes were provided to commission members by email earlier this week. And so do any commission members have any comments or changes to the draft minutes? Seeing none or hearing none, can I have a motion to approve the minutes?
So moved.
Okay, and a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. The minutes are approved as distributed. The commission has invited Inspector General Kelly Madigan, Chief Administrative Officer Stacy Rogers, County Attorney James Benjamin, IT Director Michael Freed, and HR Director Rhonda Benjamin to join us for a portion of the meeting tonight as the commission discussed possible recommendations. As parties with knowledge of current practices and who will be responsible for implementing recommendations, they have been asked to participate tonight just to weigh in on specific recommendations and provide information regarding possible barriers to implementation or unintended consequences of any potential recommendations. We're not seeking information about specific investigations or issues, but are rather looking at process and implementation issues regarding our recommendations going forward. And so I will open up the discussion for members of the commission to ask their questions of these individuals. And before I do so, I want to just note that that these individuals have made themselves available, and we are grateful to them for doing so, but are only available until 7:30 p.m. And Ms. Rogers will need to leave by 6:30 p.m. And we want to respect the tight calendars that we know all of you are working on. So thank you again. And then we also need to have time to identify the recommendations that will be communicated to the county as part of our interim report that's due on Monday. So I encourage our commission members to keep discussion of each question to 5 minutes if possible. And so I'm going to ask Brigadier General Burkhead or Judge Cox to start the questions as chairs of the subcommittees. Thank you.
Hi, good evening. If we want to just go by the our previous, just a listing of issues, Judge Cox, I believe that that it might be up to you.
Okay.
I think the first one, I've got different listings in different places, but I think we had one on access to information and access to records. And I think that's the one that touched on areas that included both HR and whether there were any concerns in the county attorney's office. In getting to recommendations on that point, I mean, I think our subcommittee and in our commission discussions, the general concept of that open access to the Inspector General to county records is something that there wasn't much debate around, but what became unclear as we got into sort of the nitty-gritty is how that is happening now, what barriers there have been. One of the things the committee was just unfamiliar with was whether most, if not all, of the records you all are looking at are electronically stored and therefore could be directly accessed, whether a lot of it is still paper records that you need to go through an agency head. Really, when we were trying to flesh out the recommendations, we needed more specifics of how the county record storage is handled, how the production currently is being managed, and what protections there are for things within records that are governed by statute or other confidentiality provisions that require some, special consideration. So that's the area that we were hoping to get comment on, actually, from all of the invited guests here this evening. I don't know who wants to start off or where we want to go with it, but I mean, it strikes me as something that maybe is just sort of a more open discussion.
I mean, I can start if you want, Rhoda Benjamin, regarding as far as HR records are concerned. Current process is the OIG's office will send an email saying that they want to review an employee record. We will get the employee's name, we will pull the record, they will come in our office, review the file. Then if they require us to make copies, we will make copies of the file and give it to them so they can take it away. As far as barriers are concerned, I don't think there are any barriers. I shouldn't say I don't think. There are no barriers right now because the OIG office will request for information. We will provide the information right away. The process currently is we have paper files. So again, we will make copies of the files and give it to the OIG. The information again comes through the department head, which is through me. And then I then designate a staff member to provide those information to the OIG's office. I hope I touched on everything that you mentioned.
That's correct. And I'll just tell you from my perspective, that's been working great. Rhoda typically is CC'd on most of the requests. The request is never of Rhoda, but it's of the person who we believe is in fact the keeper of the records. I'm not going to say the word custodian because I think that there's a different legal term for custodian, but it's important to us to go to the person that actually has that information. For the majority, HR records are in fact paper, and if we make copies, they come back to our office. Our office has two different types of locks. They're maintained on our restricted drive. We scan them to that restricted drive. If we have paper copies, they're kept in an office under lock and key and are shredded when we no longer need them. Occasionally, Rhoda has sent me records electronically, and those have been sent Virtru protected. There's also been an occasion where, with the assistance from somebody from Mr. Freed's team, Mr. Freed, nice to meet you. Welcome aboard. He has helped facilitate an internal file transfer where it's something that Ms. Benjamin and or her team can put documents on a file share that only HR and IG have access to. Those documents are then removed and put on IG's restricted drive, and then that file transfer is deleted.
So are there other records that you all are seeking where the process, that are county records where the process is less direct and less seamless? I mean, because there was certainly some information that came to us that suggested that there were problems with direct access to records, and then we're having trouble figuring it out. You're muted, Kelly.
Oh, I'm sorry, not from OHR. No, I have a very good working relationship with OHR.
Are there, that's why I'm saying, are there other areas of county records where the process is less seamless?
Well, there are records, for example, I think I have tried over time to gain access to things that are maintained electronically. For example, vendors, master agreements, contracts are all maintained in a system. It's now transferred over to Workday. So I have requests in to be able to pull these directly from Workday. Prior to that, though, I send emails to procurement if I'm seeking a copy of a master agreement or a contract from a vendor. Does that kind of answer your question?
Well, it was highlighted as an area where there was a request for recommendations to improve access to records. And I guess what we're struggling with is trying to figure out what specifically isn't working and what are the pros and cons of any recommendations that, you know, you're asking us to consider. It was identified as a problem area and we're just sort of struggling with what the problem is.
I don't necessarily think it's a problem area. I think the best practice is to have direct access. There are certainly areas of documents I don't have direct access for, and then I have to, you know, then I have worked and established a routine in different contexts to try to ask for records, but each agency maintains its records differently. I'm sure there's opportunities to have direct access to records within the agency, which is something where appropriate I have requested, but it's just not there yet.
I guess what we're struggling with is what direct access actually means beyond what you have. I mean, you're not asking obviously that all paper files are copied and available to you. You've got to go through an agency. So I'm struggling with I'm struggling understanding the problem.
Judge Cox,
Yes.
this is Stacey Rogers. I would ask that Mike Freed, who is our new director of the Office of Information and Technology, plus Mr. Freed has experience in Baltimore City with the IG in Baltimore City, as well as Ms. Benjamin. These two colleagues can speak from both perspectives, but I think Mr. Freed has from some perspective with respect to the notion of direct access and why here in Baltimore County that would be problematic.
Okay.
In terms of direct access because of the unique nature of how our IT system is configured. So Mr. Freed, would you share with the commissioners your perspective after having been here and receiving the general information we received to prepare for this evening? I think it brings some insight to experience in Baltimore City, at least, and then insight to here in Baltimore County, as far as the notion of direct access to our systems. So Mr. Freed, can you speak to this matter?
Yes, ma'am. And thank you all for having me, I guess. I had similar questions. I think it's interesting to hear about the definition of direct access, or where, to your point, those barriers are, with, I will say, all my comments with the caveat that it's my fourth day on the job. That said, I don't want that to come across as we're unprepared. You know, the team has sat down and we briefed in depth on our process, as well as you know, how we want to make sure we're supporting the IG in her work. My understanding of how that process works today, because I believe that was the first question, is the requests come in to designated members of our leadership team. We then have a subset of engineers who are identified and functionally separated from a duties standpoint. So we have some people, one person who's only looking at email, one person only looking at files, that can respond to those requests. We work with the IG's office to scope them to a technically reasonable volume. And so I want to be careful about my language. We're not looking at the content. We're not judging about the content. We're scoping down things like, hey, do you want us to send you 5 million emails, or should we tighten the search up? So this is just, you know, technical perspective across it. And then, you know, we of course fulfill those requests directly and confidentially. But that's my understanding of how that process is working today. can go into that as more is needed. One of the things that's unique about Baltimore City from a IT perspective is it is a fully centralized environment.
Baltimore
Um,
County, Baltimore County.
Baltimore County, fourth day. I get 3 slip-ups. Is that in Baltimore County, we're a fully centralized environment, meaning that all of our data and tech is all on our centralized systems, and then we protect that environment to the highest possible standard, meaning that to our most restrictive standard, right? So from a IT security perspective, our entire environment then becomes CGIS compliant. Our entire environment becomes HIPAA compliant, rather than saying, hey, these sets of data over here are, because the management nightmare of that. And so that's the reason that I think we have that strong relationship. I hope it is, and I believe it is, and want to maintain the strong relationship with the IG's office to fulfill those requests in that manner. The other things for us is because we are centralized IT in Baltimore County, we have a set of MOUs with Health and Human Services for compliance, with the Baltimore County Police Department with compliance. So that's the other reasons for why we structure things in that manner. So hopefully that adds the context to why we why we build that relationship and do it. The other reasons are that in order to the reason we only have a small subset of folks on our team that do it is 1, for compliance with those MOUs. It's 2, because in order to get them the ability to search that broadly, they need incredibly high amounts of access to the systems. So it's not just, our junior network engineers and we shuffle it off. We have people who are specialized skills, specialized training, and go through rigorous background checks that fulfill those needs.
And Mr. Free, can you speak to the language that is reflected in the MOU with the police department, because we're in this centralized environment with our IT system?
I will. Our understanding in the way that it's structured is basically we are because the police and through their state arrangements, and let's all keep in mind, I'm not the lawyer in the room, although there are several, but basically the MOUs say that, our folks, meaning that the IT folks who have access to these environments, which for us becomes the entire environment, have to be compliant with the rules and regulations of the police department. They have to be members of our team. And so that means that all members of our team go through extra checks. So we are even going through, we go through a background check as part of the county hiring process, but then in IT, we go through a rigorous police investigation check as well. So interestingly, I'm the director of this group, and there's items that I'm not allowed to be involved in yet while I'm pending my police background check at the moment.
So I guess that's a good segue into talking about the current process right now with IT. I work mainly with Tom DeLuca. We have a great relationship. At some point I did ask to be able to pull the emails myself or hire someone to be able to pull them. Right now, Tom and I work great together. He's very helpful. I think we do a good job in trying to get what the IG is requesting in whatever a reason, however long it takes Tom to do that. And I have just reiterated to Tom the confidentiality of the requests. So that's kind of how the IT piece works, but I don't ask for any documents, and the office doesn't ask for any documents of IT besides emails or access to something. It's not like documents that we're requesting.
John, you have your hand up.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me see if I can put it down now. I don't, what problem are we trying to solve here? I'm not sure I understand. The powers of the office under the code lists as one of the powers, section A1 of the relevant section. The IG has the right to obtain full and unrestricted access to all records, information, data, reports, plans, projections, matters, contracts, memoranda, correspondence, and any other materials, including electronic data of the county government. What issue are we facing? I mean, does the IG have is there reason to amend that? Is there a lack of cooperation? Okay, terrific.
John, I think that if I recall, trying to remember how the discussion came up, was that there was concern about, and I might be using the wrong term, somebody can, maybe if they recall, overreach or not getting documents within the scope of what the issue investigation is, because the language is broad. And I believe that was the issue that was brought to our attention, if I recall.
The other
I didn't
issue
raise
that
that
was,
issue.
the other issue that was raised was a suggestion that having it be vetted through the IT department was being used as a way to track the investigative scope of the IG's office. That became the bigger focus of discussion. And the reason we were trying to figure out if there's a request for more direct access, what are the barriers and what's the need? What's the need that's not being met?
So from my perspective, in terms of access to records, I'm not really, that's not a problem that I need help solving. I would prefer direct access to IT. I've been told I can't do that, so I've been working closely with Tom, and I think that relationship, and I'll defer to Tom for him to correct me if I'm wrong, has worked well. I just, I'm not certain that some of those requests in and of themselves are not confidential. That is problematic sometimes to the office and the types of investigations that the office is doing.
Mr. Fried, I
Well,
see-
Let me ask a question before we move away from Ms. Madigan. When you say not confidential, could you add some context to that? What, an example, or what do you mean exactly?
Well, I shared that information with the commission, and I don't want to speak about that in a public setting.
Mr. Fried, again, I see your hand and Ms. Rogers as well.
Thank you. I just want to clarify a little bit of wording. It was said that these requests are vetted through the IT department. I just want to be a little bit of a stickler around language that IT is, again, not vetting requests or responses for content at all. We're helping to refine queries for technical scope, but we're not we're not vetting in terms of the scope or the actual content of any of those sorts of things. So I want to make that very clear.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Rogers.
From the administration standpoint, in terms of operations, beyond the OIT staff, there are no records or reports or documents that are sent or reported to the administration regarding a request that the IG has made to the OIT staff who are designated to do that. So I'm not quite sure what the assertion is with respect to materials or requests not being confidential, because clearly the OIT staff who have to be, there's a designated number of staff within OIT who deal with this information. And so I'm not quite sure what the concern is, but beyond, I can assure you from the operational standpoint beyond IT, we have nothing to do with, nor do we request, nor are we given information about what has been requested.
Mr. Chairman,
Yes.
in an effort to, I mean, we have a lot of matters here. I think the purpose of this evening was to drill down and get some real-time info from people who are doing this on the ground. So this conversation to me demonstrates the importance of having arranged that, which I think, because it's really helpful. I would just suggest, and I don't think this is in the statute, but I think it would be perfectly fine for us to recommend something like that the fact of the request, substance of the request, et cetera, shall not be disclosed, shall remain confidential. I'd have to think about how to word that, but we're going to be making amendments to the ordinance. if that is a concern, we can't stop people from doing it, I suppose, but we can certainly make it clear that that is not to be done. And to me, that would be a reasonable step for us to do. And if we're already amending the code in other respects, we should find an appropriate place and an appropriate way to say, as part of this structure, right, that when those requests are made, the fact of the request and the substance of the request should remain confidential, except to those people who must know in order to fulfill the provision of the materials to the IG upon request, something like that. But I mean, I'm really looking tonight in particular for sort of practical information and some practical sort of cleanup sorts of things that we think we need to do, where we could speak to each other for hours and never answer them because we don't have the input from the folks who are really in the middle of this loop. So that's my suggestion here for discussion, in the hopes that maybe that would be sufficient and we could move to the next issue.
Thanks, John. I do see Ms. Benjamin's hand and Judge Cox as well, so I do want to give them opportunities. Ms. Benjamin?
Yeah, and I was in line with what John just said. John, right? I'm sorry. Yeah.
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
If we can also draft some type of confidentiality agreement for those people who are managing this process, so they will sign it. And most of the times that's what we've done in HR, that they've signed a confidentiality agreement that nothing will be shared from outside of the group that they're, so I think that would be another takeaway if their commission agrees.
Thank you. Judge Cox?
The only thing I would add, Will, is that I think this came through my committee, at least speaking on myself and the others, if they want to chime in, this satisfies the concerns. I mean, it certainly clarifies what it is we were talking about, and I think it's largely a tweak, not a big solution problem.
Okay, sounds good. So let's move on then, unless there are other concerns. Let's move on to the next issue then. So Janine, I don't know if that's you or you, Kathy.
I've got so many things floating around. Which do you have identified as the next issue, Will?
In terms of the questions that the subcommittees had, I'm not.
I'll jump over to, we were discussing the Ethics Commission recommendation for where and how the structure of that, where it sits alone, apart, the details of how that would work.
Okay. So the question is related to moving the Ethics Commission out of the Office of Inspector General, and if that were done, I think we had some questions about, and I don't know whether this is within our scope, but where that might go and, you know, what effects it may have budgetarily, either on the OIG or wherever it shifted to. So whether anyone in the county had any thoughts about, you know, how that may work if it were.
I can speak to that, Mr. Chair. I can give you the historical perspective of how the Ethics Commission, because prior to the establishment of the Office of Ethics and Accountability, which was the first iteration of the legislation here in the county, and then ultimately the second piece of legislation that was passed that created the Office of the Inspector General that combined the functions together. The Ethics Commission, which is one of many commissions here in the county, was housed within the law department. Within the law department, the Ethics Commission was supported. There was a position for an executive director. There was an administrative assistant. That particular position still exists within the Office of Law. From the standpoint of duties were just adjusted because that administrative assistant who supported the Ethics Commission was not a full-time staff responsibility. And then there was a position as far as the ethics, the counsel to the Ethics Commission, which is a deputy um, county attorney who still serves in some capacity, well, more of a supervisory capacity at this point. One of Attorney Benjamin's staff attorneys now provides staff support as far as the attorney support for the Ethics Commission. That function is Ethics Counsel. Potential mileage reimbursement, parking, and other miscellaneous expenses were at that time expensed from the Office of Law's budget. We certainly have the capacity. We're in budget development season as it stands for fiscal year 2024, and the capacity to have this commission sit or return to the Office of Law does exist. We also have commissions, a commission that sits in the office, Director Rhoda Benjamin's office, and there's capacity to house the commissions, just like the other commissions that we have. We have numerous commissions, and they sit within departments. The Department of Economic and Workforce Development has several commissions that department hosts. So the county has an infrastructure and had a infrastructure prior to the establishment of the Office of Ethics and Accountability, and then eventually the Inspector General's office. And that is something that the county, should the Blue Ribbon Commission recommend that the commission return to a standalone commission, we would be prepared to do.
Okay.
I can kind of complement that answer. From when I first started, I researched how other jurisdictions handle the Ethics Commission, because as you may be aware, there is an Ethics Commission in Anne Arundel County, Baltimore City, Prince George's County, and Montgomery County. And all of those jurisdictions, at a minimum, have 2 full-time employees, a lawyer staffed with the executive director and an administrative assistant. The work of the commission has steadily increased since I've taken over. I think Ms. Leppert can probably speak a little bit more in detail, but it's trainings, it's now online trainings. It's there was a certain workload, and that workload has continued to grow. I believe that if you are going to separate it from the Inspector General's office, I do not think it should go back to the Office of Law. I think that it is an inherent conflict to have it housed within the Office of Law, since the Office of Law by default represents each and every Baltimore County employee. And so you're going to have situations where employees are filing complaints against other employees, and agencies and lobbyists are filing. It's just going to be an inherent conflict of interest. I think if you are in fact going to move it, it would be important to move it to be a standalone entity where you house it. I don't know that that's as important as it being an independent standalone entity. There's so much language in this Baltimore County Code about the purpose of the Ethics Commission and the purpose of the ethics laws, and it speaks to this independence. There's a rule that at least 2 of the commissioners have to be from a different political affiliation than the current county executive. So it really stresses this independence. And I think that it's both the appearance as well as an actual conflict to have it housed somewhere that's not independent. I also think you really should be staffed by a minimum of 2 full-time individuals. Baltimore City has 3 dedicated solely to the Ethics Commission, and Prince George's County has 5. That's what I would say about that.
Okay, thank you, Inspector Madigan. Attorney Benjamin?
Excuse me, good evening. The one thing I would note, I think that as the CEO said that prior to Ms. Madigan coming on board, the Ethics Commission was housed in the Office of Law. I'm not sure if I would agree that that's an inherent conflict. I think it's something that needs to be looked at on a case by case. And in a particular case, if there is a conflict, then there are mechanisms under the charter to be able to refer the matter outside. But I don't think that I would necessarily agree that it's inherent, but it is something that in a particular case by case basis to look at to see whether or not conflict does exist. And I think that's consistent with the charter.
Okay, thank you. Madam CEO?
I would concur with the Inspector General with respect to support. And as she indicated, the operational side of the current Inspector General's office in this last budget cycle for FY23, we indeed added a attorney position and an ethics attorney position when Ms. Madigan presented her preliminary budget, which starts with me. We fully supported and recommended that position to the county executive and ultimately to the county council, which was a staff, another staff member that was added. So I would indicate that the position should be staffed, because while the current structure has the Inspector General serving in both roles, the role of the Executive Director of the Ethics Commission and the Inspector General, that is the FTE that we're talking about. You have to have that level of support. And then the ethics attorney position that we approved for the current structure is the second position. So I totally agree. I believe that the operation needs that, and the county is willing to provide that level of support to the commission as we look at each of our commissions, because I said we have a number of commissions that are housed in various departments across the county, given the discipline of what that commission is, and we look at what support is needed. And sometimes that support changes over time. And I certainly agree, and the Inspector General and I have concurred on a number of occasions about the increased workload, particularly with the increase of the financial disclosures that must be submitted each year. We moved in a collaborative way from around 200 to upwards of 400. And Ms. Madigan can attest to the fact I advocated for the additional support that was needed to handle that workload. We are indeed willing to support the Ethics Commission based on the increased workload that has been generated with the establishment of the initial establishment of the Ethics and Accountability Office, and then ultimately the joint endeavor under the Inspector General's office. So we are in a position to do that.
Thank you, Madam Chief. John and then Tom.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I don't feel particularly compelled to get into recommendations about the number of staff any office ought to have. And I'm convinced that I'm persuaded that the county chief administrative officer is committed to adequate staffing. We can certainly, include something as part of the recommendation that says, and shall be staffed adequately. You know, and she's on the record. So I don't want to micromanage whether it should have 2 people or 3 people. That's my own view. I'm more concerned about the other issue, which is the placement issue, which is to me a much more fundamental structural issue. And now I'm sort of a little bit confused. I thought that it was fairly easy to sort of recommend that it be in the law department. Ms. Madigan has raised the concern. I'm sure she's raising it in good faith. And I know she's not specifically directing it at Mr. Benjamin, but just it's a structural question, right? I don't know how we resolve that. I mean, it seemed like a reasonable idea to me. I don't understand the county's structure well enough to know what it means, where it sits. I don't know if, what was the word that we've been using? Not resides, forgive me. Someone's been using a word, you know, and I don't know if that means reports to or is attached to. I mean, at some point we just have to resolve that. I mean, does it have to sit somewhere and be in some org chart in a department? You know, I don't want to create a conflict where we're trying to separate these things sufficiently so that there are minimal ethical issues and so on. But I also don't want to overdo it in terms of, you know, if the thing can sit somewhere but be independent in the sense that it has the independent authority which it has under the Ethics Commission's code, which seems fairly independent. So I just need to untangle that. And that's exactly why we're having this conversation, so that the real people in real time can sort of say, if you do that, you're going to have this problem. So how do we resolve this in a way that makes sense for everybody?
Okay, Tom, Mr. Rogers and Ms. Madigan, I think want to respond to John. Is that okay? Can we?
Yeah.
Okay, Ms. Rogers, I'll saw you in first and then Ms. Madigan.
Well, I'll speak to it from an operational standpoint and my own experience with commissions. Within the government, a entity has to be housed in a budget. That's the first thing, where the positions are funded, where any operational funding to carry out the charge is housed. But from an independence perspective, the independence comes with what is cited in the charter in terms of their operation. I'll give you an example from the state of Maryland. During my tenure as a state deputy secretary in the Maryland State Department of Human Services, she used to be Human Resources, and this structure exists to this day. In my budget was the Maryland Commission for Women. The Maryland Commission for Women in the statute is an independent entity that carries out their work. Our job was to help support them, because you have to, in order to have money and resources and staff within a department, you have to support them. That's how things operate here in the government with respect to boards and commissions. They have to be housed somewhere, but that does not have the same connotation as reports to. It's more like is hosted in. For example, in Ms. Benjamin's budget, the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion, the money for the staff, the money for operations is housed in her budget. However, Ms. Benjamin does not have oversight over the Office of Equity, Diversity, and Inclusion. It's a separate freestanding office. Another example, in Mr. Benjamin's budget, the Office of Government Affairs, OGA, is housed in Mr. Benjamin's budget for budgetary purposes. The funding for the staff, the operations, etc., are housed in the Office of Law, but the OGA, the Office of Government Affairs, operates as a separate office, independent from Mr. Benjamin's office. That's how the boards and commissions operate. They operate independent from wherever they're hosted, if you will. Now, I don't know what the structure was prior, because I was very new to the county, but I know how boards and commissions operate that are defined in code or charter or in statute, in the case of Maryland State Department of Human Services being the host department for literally numerous commissions until the governor at that time decided to lift those commissions out and move them as a separate operating entity in another part of the government. So that's how organizations manage. You know, it's not that it is that operating entity that they report to, they operate independently. And within the department, in most instances, they have a liaison, if you will, that helps them with the things they need.
Thank
That's how it's handled procedurally and operationally.
Thank you for that clarification. Ms. Madigan?
In my research in initially requesting additional resources for the office to help with the ethics workload, I not only researched other ethics commissions, but also their budgets. And all of the other ethics commissions in Maryland have their own agency code and their own budget. I don't know if that is because both the appearance and in actuality, but the Ethics Commission in Anne Arundel County, if you look it up and go to the Anne Arundel County open budget and you type in Ethics Commission, they have their own budget. They have their own line items. It's not a big budget, but it's their own budget separate and apart from the rest of government, because the Ethics Commission, the core mission of it is to be independent, to give anyone that comes before it, there's no appearance, so to speak. And that is the same with Montgomery County. Baltimore City is housed in the Inspector General's office, similar to our office. And Prince George's County is its separate. My 2 cents would be, certainly respect Ms. Rogers' position. I certainly respect Mr. Benjamin's position. The former county attorney communicated to me that part of the reason for removing it from the Office of Law was there were conflicts. There was a intentional decision to put it somewhere independent. So if the Inspector General's office is independent, if you are going to separate it from the Inspector General's office, it should be its own independent standalone commission. Maybe perhaps it has to be housed somewhere else, but as one of the issues that this commission has been talking about, one aspect of independence is in fact financial independence. When you have your own line item budget, again, it doesn't have to be a lot of money, but it is its own entity.
Well, Ms. Madigan, I will also remind you this, and you know this, that in the code, the Ethics Commission and ethics activities of the county are under the responsibility of the county administrative officer. So that's one part that I still say plays a role. Where an entity is housed for budgetary or operational considerations, we are happy to look at this. You know, we're very big on benchmarking. So in that, if a recommendation does come back from the Ethics Commission that the 2 entities should be separated, we're more than happy to benchmark with other jurisdictions, as we've done on many instances, even with your own budget, you know, recommending to you to benchmark in terms of appropriateness of where they are, because the issue is, does the commission get the support that it needs to operate? That's the biggest part. Does it get the staff? Does it get the dollars? Clearly, we have a full commitment to the activities of the Ethics Commission, because we have significantly increased the activities around the submission, just in one part of it, the submission of the annual financial disclosures, which not only now are financial disclosures received, but reviewed and checked under your tenure, how we've moved that. So the government has a commitment to ensuring the success of the commission. whether that sits in a line item in the general budget, HR, if there were issues. This is the first I'm ever hearing about the former county attorney indicating that there were conflicts of interest. But our agenda is about having a well operated and efficient best practice ethics commission and Office of the Inspector General. That's the objective.
Thank you. Thank you both for those perspectives. Tom, you have a question?
Yeah, for Ms. Rogers. If it's housed within another department, is it independently funded, or you fund the department and a portion of those funds go down to the Ethics Commission?
The way we budget, we could have a department, for example, as I mentioned, Mr. Benjamin's operation has the Office of Government Affairs in the budget. Their budget is just a sub-object in the budget. Their money is theirs uniquely. The government also has the ability to set up a line item or a agency code for an entity. Now that would be contrary to how our other boards and commissions are set up, but that's not beyond the realm of possibility for doing it. As I said, the biggest issue is the commission getting the support that's needed? Staffing, funding, and a liaison to ensure if there are any other needs that they have, that those needs are met. Each commission is established that way. The money is, if it's, for example, the Agricultural Advisory Board and the Economic Commission, they sit in the Department of Economic and Workforce Development. In that department, there's a subline item for the monies that they need to operate. Now, those are voluntary individuals, but they still have some expenses that have to be supported. All government money has to live somewhere in a line item. So the money that's placed in a budget, whether it's in another department, for that particular entity, that's what the money is for. It's not like in Director Benjamin's budget, I'm talking about Rhoda Benjamin, that the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion feeds off of her budget. There's a subline item that money is dedicated to the Office of Diversity, Equity, and Inclusion. It's not a separate statutory office. We have to put the money somewhere.
Okay.
Right,
but
and if
the-
I can just add, so in my budget, since diversity and inclusion is under me, it would be like, if my budget line item code is 1301, diversity and inclusion is 1302, because it's just separate line item in their budget, if that makes sense. It's two budgets within the department.
But the head of the department, be it Office of Law or somewhere else, if you budget so much for the commission, they can't move those funds elsewhere. It's guaranteed funding, is that right?
Correct. We budget based on line item. We
Okay.
budget based on what the service delivery is. What we budget for the Office of Diversity, Equity, Inclusion sits in its budget. And when we have these budgets that are housed like that, that's why I call it co-hosted in the same agency code. Both entities come in and present their budgets.
What would be, would there be any downside to having it as an independent commission that's not within any departments? I looked at, for example, Montgomery County, and it looks to me like their ethics commission is independent and is not housed in another department. I could be wrong on that, but that was my impression. Is there any problem with having it as a independent commission as opposed to being
Happy to
Yeah.
take a look at that. As I indicated, if the recommendation comes back that this should be done, then we'll take a look at what is the best mechanism to host the Ethics Commission budgetarily. But the issue is the resources to do the work. I am going to continue to advocate for the support staff needed, because it's a lot of work. It takes a lot of work to, first of all, bring in the financial disclosures. And then secondly, review the financial disclosures to see if they're accurate. It's just not about having people comply with submission. You have to look at it. In the prior administrations, they did not do that. You know, that there was no compliance aspect of it, and we moved. And I give Ms. Madigan credit for setting up that infrastructure that helps us to do that, because that's where we wanted to go. Ethics, the Ethics Commission and the ethics training and everything that has been done, 100% of staff taking our annual ethics training. Those are really, really important things that Ms. Madigan and I worked heretofore cooperatively on. So we will fund the Ethics Commission work because we care just as much as about that work as we care about the work of the IG's office proper. So whatever is the best mechanism in terms of a budget line item, we have the legal capability to do that. But heretofore, commissions have been hosted within departments, just like the commission was hosted in the Office of Law prior to the establishment, the passage of the legislation establishing the Office of Ethics and Accountability.
I understand it's always been done that way, but is there a risk or a downside that you see if it was done differently and it was just?
I don't
made
see a
an independent
risk.
commission? Okay,
I don't, it's already an independent commission, but it's
Right.
where the money sits. I don't see a downside. To me, it's just mechanics of
okay,
where is the money going to sit, and are we adequately resourcing the commission to do what needs to be done? We had the same situation recently, well, last year, with the agricultural community, the agricultural advisory, well, it's a sub-advisory board, but that was something big enough that we had to work on, that we recommended, hey, this needs a FTE to help work with the members of the agricultural community. So we funded the FTE to support that board in the Department of Economic and Workforce Development, because they are there to help that board, the agricultural subcommittee. That's how boards and commissions are pretty much staffed, by departments. We have the Health and Human Services Advisory Board. We have boards and commissions. We have, we did a report. We have, I don't want to give the wrong number, but we have multiple boards and commissions in the county.
okay. And I had another question for Mr. Benjamin, if that's okay.
Yes.
Okay. The Ethics Commission was housed within the Department of Law for a certain period of time. During that time, did issues come up in terms of conflicts, and did that become a problem? How was it resolved?
This
Well,
would
you
have
have
been,
some, I guess, practical experience with this.
this would have been prior to me becoming
Mhm.
on as county attorney. By the time I came on, the change was already in place to be able to take it out of the Office of Law. My only point was I just didn't know whether I would agree that it was an inherent conflict. I do think that you had to look at it to see whether there is one, but I think that it would need to be done on a case by case if it were to come back. That's what
Okay.
I'm thinking.
You don't know anything about the experience that, how those issues were handled when it
No.
was within the Department of Law, because that preceded you?
when I was, that preceded me, and my predecessor, to my recollection at least, did not share with me the specific issues relating to conflicts before I came on.
Okay, thank you.
And I was here just a little earlier than Mr. Benjamin. He came in the fall of 2019, and then Ms. Madigan in January of 2020, I believe. Is that correct, Ms. Madigan? I came in the spring of 2019 and was here as this was developing, but I was never briefed by the former county attorney that there were conflicts. So I have no knowledge. That preceded me too, if there were. I never had information of that nature. The county wanted to establish an Office of Ethics and Accountability, which was the original legislation that mirrored Prince George's County. But we're more than happy to look at alternatives of where or how the commission should be reflected in the county budget. But it must be reflected in the budget. That's our point. And we have plenty of time to do that.
Kathy?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, similar to the last issue, I mean, it's a great discussion, but I think we're in the weeds on things that are not this commission's, within our purview. Our task was whether we should decouple ethics from the IG's operation. And we made recommendations along that way. I don't think we have to figure out which budget group it goes under. Ms. Rogers' points are well taken. How it's structured and it needs a budget and line items, all true. But I don't think in our recommendations, we're getting down to saying, we think it should be removed. And by the way, put it under, the Office of Law or some other agency. I think it's all a great discussion, but I'm concerned that we're sort of in the weeds on things that are beyond the purview of what we're going to make recommendations on. So for what that's worth.
Thank you, Kathy. And I do agree. However, I think the discussion has been helpful just to make sure. I think what we wanted to make sure we're not breaking something that we shouldn't break. So, yeah, Tom.
Yeah, I'm happy to leave that to this, not go into that, leave it to discretion. But I thought it was in the when the issues were set forth, I thought one of the things we were supposed to do was make a recommendation as to where the Ethics Commission would go if it is separated. But if that's beyond our purview, I don't have a problem with that.
We can take a look at that and go back to Kathy. You're muted, but we can take a look at that.
Yeah, and I think what we've been saying is the Ethics Commission should stay its own independent thing and be separately housed, separately budgeted. It is robustly growing, and none of us want to discourage that. Whether for budget purposes it gets tagged with the Office of Law's budget or some other group, like that piece of it, I'm not sure I care.
Okay.
I just, at the risk of going 3 seconds longer, there currently is no budget for the Ethics Commission. There's an
Right.
Inspector General budget. There's no line item in the Inspector General's budget for the Ethics Commission.
Well, I think that's as a result of how the second set of the second legislation was developed, because the original intent was an Office of Ethics and Accountability. So it was one budget. And then when the name was changed and nothing else was changed about the budget, but you do have within your budget personnel that's associated with the Ethics Commission now because of the advocacy around ensuring that that part of the operation was funded. Basically, if the two entities are divided out, then the appropriate resources for the Ethics Commission will be identified in a budget to be housed, to be determined, wherever that may be. I'm a big believer in benchmarking, and we will look at the structures elsewhere now that we're rethinking if this is the recommendation that comes forward. But the Ethics Commission will be funded, and given the funding, that funding has to live somewhere. FTEs and operational dollars, and that's the budget and finance team and my responsibility to make sure, just like for every single entity in county government, I do have that responsibility to make sure that things are funded and the money sits where it needs to sit appropriately.
Thank you, Ms. Rogers. And I think with that, we can move forward. Tom, is this something that you, go ahead.
It's a different kind of part of this issue, and I'll try to keep it brief. For Ms. Madigan, in your new budget, one of the 3 new hires I know is supposed to be dedicated to Ethics Commission work. If we did separate them, would it make sense for that person to go over to the Ethics Commission, or does that person have transferable skills that it would make sense for them to stay within your department?
So that's a great question. I advertised as quickly as possible, and the new attorney started in November, middle of November. That attorney was hired based on their background to do that job. I think they would be, I think they could transition over nicely. If I was asked what resources the Inspector General's office needed, I would not have hired an attorney that was going to be doing ethics presentations and reviewing compliance documents. While she does have a lot of skills, I think that position would have to be reclassed, because once, if they are decoupled, the Inspector General's office will no longer, I mean, that would be a need that we would fulfill. There are other needs that we would fulfill prior to that.
Okay, thank you, and thank you, Mr. Johnson.
Thank you. And Ms. Rogers, I know you're going to have to leave. There was one other issue that I wanted you to be able to weigh in on, if we could just very quickly. And commissioners, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but there was some question with regards to financial independence for the Office of Inspector General and how that may affect, if at all, county budget or county budgeting. And so we just had, some questions about that, that if the Office of Inspector General was budgeted in such a way that they were mandated a particular percentage of the overall county budget, how that would affect the county budget. So I just give, for instance, so for instance, if it was 1% of the overall county budget, that's just an example. What effect would that have on the way budgeting is done in the county, or would that have an effect?
Well, I'm not from, I know that I've heard that is one mechanism that is used in other places. I don't know if that is a prevailing best practice, meaning that a significant number of jurisdictions do that. But I'll say when we're talking about a $4.2 billion budget, and the need for resources and services commensurate with the work that needs to be done. I don't know, it's like an allocation, but does that allocation fit the need of what needs to be done by the whatever entity, whether it's the IG's office or any other entity? Is the amount of money based on reminds me of federal formulaic, process? Does that fit the need? Is that over budget, under budget? The way we budget in county government is, what is the need? And I feel like that whatever Ms. Madigan has put forward in her budget has been funded. And when you look at the benchmarking that she did last year, as she and I discussed when she put her budget forward, she's growing at the same rate as comparable operations or IG's office with similar characteristics. So it's kind of difficult for me to say that a percentage allocation to one program versus another is something that goes with how municipal and county budgeting is done. County budgeting is done based on need, based on what are your stated needs for staff, dollars and cents. I do believe there are some operational dollars that the IG's office needs to consider. And whatever has been brought forward, we consider, and once the deliberations leave my area and we go to the county executive level, then the recommendations from the budget team and I, for Ms. Madigan's budget have always been to support that budget. So I don't know how a percentage allocation would work it would be unique. It would be unique to our budgeting. But clearly something that if that's a prevailing practice, is something that we would look at.
Yeah. And I think what we're really looking for are just ways going forward in the future. And this may not affect your administration, or maybe once your administration is finished and Ms. Madigan is no longer there, but making sure that the budget process cannot be used punitively against an inspector general. So that's really.
Well, I think that budgetary cuts or budgetary requests, if there are concerns, that there's some language maybe, but it's very difficult for me as an administrator looking at our current budget process to respond back to your question about a percentage allocation.
Okay. All right, thank you. Are there other questions for Ms. Rogers before she leaves from the commissioners?
I have a 7 o'clock I've got to jump on.
So anything, Brandon? If not, thank you so much, Ms. Rogers. We appreciate you being with us tonight.
And on behalf of the administration, the county executive, the leadership team, we want to thank you all for taking on this effort, because as I've shared in other instances, our goal is to ensure that we have an effective operating system, our inspector general operation, our ethics and accountability operation, which we've done some incredible work enhancing that and enhancing the understanding here in Baltimore County government as to what ethics and accountability means, because it was not necessarily administered or articulated in that way, because that's the first step of this, having people understand what is expected. And then on the investigative side, bringing forth issues and concerns that need to be addressed, which we certainly have addressed issues and concerns that have come forward that we could indeed do things about. In many instances we have. So we are very optimistic and hopeful that this process will help us to see our way through to ensuring that we have a world-class ethics and accountability and inspector general operation here in Baltimore County. That's what it's all about for us.
Thank you.
So hopefully my colleagues can answer anything else. But I thank you. I did have a prior commitment, another WebEx actually at 7.
Okay. Thank you again. We appreciate it again.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you. And so Janine and Kathy, I'll give it back to you for other questions that you may have for clarification.
I'll go over to, I think we've got the largest of those answered. Tom, anything from you?
On which issue?
On any of the issues that were left for clarity questioning?
Well, yeah, I have one question for Ms. Madigan. I think we had reached a tentative consensus at the last meeting that, because one of the issues we're supposed to address is, who would be responsible for ethics training. And I think we come to a consensus that should remain within the ethics department. but it would be helpful to have a component that addressed, in that training, the role and function of the OIG, and that maybe that could be done by the OIG's office. I just wanted to ask Ms. Madigan, is that doable? Would that be burdensome to try to incorporate you into the, with having responsibility for one small part of the overall ethics training?
Absolutely. I would welcome that. I don't think I would make it as part of the ethics training. I would have a separate training for the Inspector General's office. So when I first started, I went and I made a video, that now plays at new employee orientation, talking about the requirements of a Baltimore County employee for ethics. I then went and created an online course and did ethics training. I would take that same approach for Inspector General training. I would make a separate video because I would assume if you were to hire a new executive director, they're going to have a different message and they're going to have a different way that they're going to want to present ethics. That's no longer something I'm responsible for. I would have a video from the Inspector General, welcome you to Baltimore County, talking about hopefully the code of conduct and other things, a duty to cooperate, what it means when the Inspector General reaches out to you, how to contact us. I would have one of the things that I think is really important and something I want to do is part of, I got really positive feedback when the Inspector General reports were sent out countywide because other employees were aware of the office, aware of the conduct that had been the subject of the report. I think that was a really good practice. I probably would make potentially an online course about the Inspector General. I would probably update newsletters quarterly or yearly, talking about the different reports and the results of those reports. I think I would handle that independently and let whoever is the new ethics person kind of put their spin on it. But it's very important. Education is a huge piece of this. I spent a lot of time when I did that for the ethics. I certainly is something I'm going to do. If you were to separate them, I think some of these recommendations have been, and I think I communicated with you, it's been a challenge to grow a new agency 8 weeks before COVID, when I had two totally separate agencies. There is outreach for the Inspector General's office that I want to do, and I'm very committed to doing this work. It's very time consuming, but it's really important. And once you have it established, it is, it kind of exponentially builds upon itself. And I've kind of seen that with the ethics work. It's the combination of the video at new employee orientation, the live trainings, the online course, getting inquiries, having people reach out. And that's the same kind of three-pronged approach I would take for the Inspector General office.
Thank you. And thank you, Janine. I think that's all I have on the issues that we were, primarily responsible for.
Thank you, Tom. John, I give you an opportunity.
Thanks. I just want to, while we have both the incumbent IG and the incumbent county attorney, I think there doesn't seem to be any question about separate counsel, et cetera, when necessary. And we agree we wouldn't get into the details of how the county would procure or manage or provide. But there's just one question we had, which was sort of the trigger for that. And whether that is a decision of the IG that she needs independent counsel, a decision of the county attorney that there's a conflict and she feels, can't represent, or whether it's a joint decision. I just thought it would be useful to hear your views on which of those paths makes the most sense, practically speaking, to the both of you as the incumbents.
Who did you want to hear from first? Myself?
I would not deign to choose.
Well, I'll start. I think frankly, it's an important point for both the Office of Law and for the Office of the Inspector General. I think that there are concerns that the OIG has as far as conflict. And I think also too, there may be the concerns that the Office of Law has as well. I think there are issues of conflict for both offices. And so I think as a result of that, it makes sense for the OIG to have a separate counsel.
I just would say, I agree with Mr. Benjamin. I think the trigger should be from the Inspector General's side. If the Inspector General, and whether it's me or whoever else is sitting in this seat, believes that there's a conflict of interest, I think that should be the trigger. The county attorney reports directly to the county executive, and thus it is not necessary. Mr. Benjamin and I have had very frank conversations. I have requested in writing and orally to Mr. Benjamin on separate occasions a request for independent counsel. And I think the trigger has to stay. The trigger should be from the IG. I don't think that there should have to be consensus. I don't think Mr. Benjamin should have to make that decision. I think whoever is sitting in the role of Inspector General is concerned about accountability, waste, efficient use of money. And if they make the decision that they need an independent counsel, that is not something that's going to be taken lightly, because it's going to cost money. It's going to be a process. It would be done with delicacy, but when that decision is made, that decision should be respected.
I don't disagree with Ms. Madigan. I think that if it's something where the Office of the Inspector General believes that they need a separate counsel, I don't think that is something where we necessarily they would need to get approval, if you will, from the Office of Law. But my point was, I think we both have. It makes sense from both the Office of the Inspector General and from the Office of Law for the OIG to have separate counsel.
Yeah, no, Ms. Benjamin, I was focused on the subordinate point, which was the assuming that's the case, who gets to decide who pulls the trigger. Ms. Madigan is saying she thinks it needs to be in the discretion, pardon me, of the OIG, and she does not think that that would be abused because of the sort of public pressure against, costs and waste, which ironically is what she's responsible for. And I was just asking whether, you and she were in agreement on that, because at some point, I think we do want, I think it is not in the weeds for us to say that there should be separate counsel. And here is when that here's the trigger for separate counsel. So my question is just, do you agree, or at least is it acceptable to you that the IG would be able to make that decision without consulting the Office of Law to say, Mr. County Attorney, do you agree that we have a conflict here, et cetera, et cetera?
I mean, I think that if the OIG has concerns relating to separate counsel, I mean, I think that's something that they should be able to address. And I think that, as I've said before, that the Office of Law has its own issues or concerns as it relates to conflict. So I don't have an issue with that. I mean, I think it ultimately, whatever the commission recommends as far as being consistent with best practices.
Yeah. So I'll just say, I'm sorry, Mr. Benjamin.
Go ahead.
No, I'll just say for the benefit of the commission, where I take that is to say that either could, because I don't know why it would be one and not the other. I think either could. You don't need consensus, Ms. Madigan, but I think I could imagine a situation in which we want the county attorney to be able to say, I hear what you're saying, Madam IG, but I'm just not comfortable and I don't really care what you think. I get to decide also because I'm a lawyer. So my where I come down, having heard this, just to close the discussion from my perspective, would be that either office would have the prerogative to declare that there's a conflict that requires separate counsel. I think that's what I'm hearing. So thank you both very much. Appreciate it.
Okay.
Mr. Chair, just one more before our committee concludes. I just wanted to go back to Mr. Freed on the issue of the documents and the confidentiality. I just want to, maybe this is not, I hate the word fair, but just from a standpoint of your responsibility for your system, and then using your example of law enforcement, for example, or do you have any concerns about what you'll be signing as far as your as far as confidentiality, where the caveats may be with regard to when information is shared.
I mean, let me take a stab at answering your question. I think that I'll say that I think we have a process that we feel works well and collaboratively with the IG, and also does its diligence to protect our technical infrastructure and the records of the county from a cyber perspective.
Is that documented?
I know that there is a process that we follow. Whether that is codified in a policy, I would have to follow up with my colleagues and get back to you on. But again, I know there is at least a strong working relationship there, and I believe the arrangement where those requests come from the IG and we're able to work with their office to fill them is something that works well. And I don't see, no barriers from our perspective to keep that going.
Thank you, Mr. Freed. Mr. Chair, I think that's it for our subcommittee.
Okay, thank you, Janine. I know that there was a question with regard to draft report notification and response in terms of whether or not individuals who are cleared of wrongdoing should be given an advance copy of the report or a right to review and make comments. So I'm not sure which committee. Kathy, was that your committee that looked at that?
That came out of our committee, and the discussion that gave rise to that centered around comments that had come back and forth about whether certain things would have changed the IG's view if they had been brought to their attention, whether and in some reports, there have been debates in the report and then the response to the report about facts that may or may not seem critical to certain people, whether there's a process that would improve sort of the public trust and confidence that everything that could be or should be considered has been considered before a final report is published, and that whether there should be some way in to make sure that that's vetted before publication as opposed to after the fact with these responses and rebuttal type of things. So that's what led to the issue being raised. I'm sorry Ms. Rogers had to leave, and I don't think we had time to get into it with her before she left. I certainly would welcome the IG's comments on it, and it may be that we have to circle back and see whether there are other administration comments, but we don't want to overcomplicate a process, but everybody in this wants the best possible published information out there. So that's what we were putting on the table.
Okay. Ms. Madigan?
Sure. I have kind of a long answer for this question, so bear with me. The first thing I want to do is describe the current process. I want to tell you what the other offices in Maryland do, and then I want to kind of address the concerns. So the current process is a draft report is sent to the county administrative officer, the chief of staff, the county attorney, the agency head for wherever, if it's an employee or an issue within that department. And if it's a personnel related issue, Ms. Benjamin, as the head of OHR, receives a copy of that report. There is then and if it happened to be a matter arising from the separate branch of government, the legislative branch, that report would then go to the chair of county council and the secretary of county council. If it was a report that addressed both the executive branch of government and the legislative branch of government, it would go to all of those people. There is then an opportunity to respond should they choose so. The response comes back. I think one time based on the response, we have changed the draft report and the report is then published. I want to tell you how the other offices in Maryland, the three other IG offices handle this process. In Montgomery County for investigations, Ms. Lamarzi sends a copy to the county administrative officer. Nobody else is CC'd on that report. And that county administrative officer has 2 to 3 days to respond should they choose so. In the school IG, Mr. Henry, he sends a copy of any investigative report to counsel for the school board. That is the only person he sends it to. And they have a very brief amount of time to respond. Neither Ms. Lamarzi nor Mr. Henry change their report as a result of the response. They send final reports, not draft reports. Ms. Cumming in the city sends a copy of the report to whoever the action holder is, whether that action holder is the department or the mayor's office. She then gets the response, and when it is published for all to see. And I just want to check that I've represented that correctly based on the information that was provided to me this week. The final copy in the city is sent to the final, so one, Ms. Cummings sent it to the action holder, whether that's the department head or whomever. She gets a response. The final report is then sent to the mayor and the city solicitor as a courtesy, as well as the department involved. And she makes no changes based on whatever comment she receives. The role of the Inspector General is to make government better. There are two branches of government, executive and legislative. I am not the decision maker. I draft reports and put them in the hands of the decision makers for them to make a decision. I cannot imagine a worse scenario for an administration than to get a copy of a report. Again, these are administrative reports that we're doing that identifies employee misconduct, and that employee is getting the report at the exact same time. I think that creates liability for the administration. I think that then limits whatever personnel action they may or may not take, and or have an opportunity to have an additional investigation based on what the report has shown. I also think it's a very, very slippery slope to start to invite responses from other people as a result of this report. Now, some of this, from what Judge Cox has kind of articulated, some of this feedback is more along the lines of dictating an investigation that an Inspector General is doing. If the Inspector General or someone working in the office has done an investigation and fails to interview someone, well, that is something that could be contained in the report. There might be a very good reason why that person wasn't interviewed or was attempted to be interviewed. But these draft reports are already being sent to 5 separate action holders within the executive branch: county administrative officer, chief of staff, county attorney, department head, and the head of HR if appropriate. Ms. Rogers, when she and I talked about this process, those were the individuals that she asked me to CC. I don't believe that there would be any benefit to having additional individuals see copies of reports and comment on copies of reports. Again, the majority of the conduct is going to be, these reports are essentially about misconduct or failure to follow procedures, failure to do something that I am bringing to the attention of the decision makers. I cannot think of a more adversarial scenario. I will defer to Ms. Benjamin and I will defer to Mr. Benjamin. There's both adversarial scenarios personnel-wise to have other people receive the reports at the same time as management. And I think that there are potential liabilities for both the administration and for the Inspector General for inviting additional comments. Sorry, that was a very long answer.
But can I have a follow-up question, though? The process you're describing is nowhere that I've seen in any of the policy or procedures or, that policy may be and I don't doubt that it is the existing policy and practice.
Mm-hmm.
It's nowhere in any of the materials that have been shared with us that those drafts are shared, they go to those people. I mean, that's a policy you currently have.
Well, they're on each and every copy of the report. The signature page has the CCs.
I mean, but my point is, in terms of best practices, we're looking at recommendations, we're looking at the statute and what it says, we're looking what the requirements are and trying to keep the stuff that works well and is good and make sure that we make improvements in other areas. Is that, I mean, by is there a written policy? Should there be a written policy? It's
Oh.
not reflected in the statute or
The statute, well, so it actually is reflected in the statute. The statute
not in
says,
that detail.
not in that detail. No, that's a business practice, and I can certainly codify that to the policies and procedures. The statute says that the Inspector General shall share their work to the council and to the administration. Ms. Rogers requested that those are the individuals to be considered as part of the administration.
And I think our point is sort of looking at this not in the context of what are you doing today and what is this administration doing? This is a process that all of us hope lives and grows beyond where we are right now. It's how do you codify best practices? Should it be in a policy and procedures manual? Should it be?
I can certainly codify that. I mean, what's in the policies and procedure manual is the process of reports and the various types of reports, but I can certainly add a paragraph about who the reports go to and who is CC'd on those reports.
Well, and it sounds like the current practice is that a draft goes for comment and that you have the opportunity, if the comment led you to believe you should, to reopen, interview, do whatever else you would think. Which
Yes, and
was
the
point we were trying to get to.
Yeah, the most recent report is the first time we actually, based on the response, we changed language in the report, and that is noted in our reply, that based on your response, we changed this language.
But then I guess that begs the question though, then all of that got published as opposed to a final report that doesn't just have the final version of things.
Right, and some of that is frankly, Judge Cox, with like a resource issue. I mean, these other agencies that are doing these reports back and forth and then producing public synopsises, they then they take a 40-page report and synthesize it down to one page. They have, triple the staff that I have. We write the report. When we write the report, we write it for publication, for transparency purposes. We get the response. If we've changed something, that's included. And that's our business process, because until, a couple weeks ago, we were an office of 3 people.
I guess the concern I have with that is then, if there's something, and I'm not talking about a specific report, but were there a report where you send a draft report that says ABC, the response says, well, on C, you didn't consider blah, 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 and you then say, you're right, C is completely wrong, it should be D.
Right.
If all of that gets published for the public to actually, that can be a very misleading thing. You have to read to the 3rd report to get to the fact that C is really D.
Well, that's not true, because we changed our initial report, right? So in the last report that we did about something with the alley reconstruction program, we changed the language in the draft report based on their response. I think it's just practice for other offices and kind of part of the principles of inspector generals to be transparent about how that came from. So if I've done something, I've gotten something wrong, that's kind of I think that's the only time we've changed the language. We have put that out there. So it's not 3 different ones. You read the initial report, those changes are in the report. You then see the response and you see the reply. And I think we've only written 2 replies. They're very, very rare that we would write a reply. I could conceive of a scenario, it hasn't happened yet. We spend a lot of time making sure our information is correct before even getting to a draft report. But I could conceive a scenario where if we said A, B, and C in a draft report and the response came back, you were totally, completely wrong, I guess we would reconsider whether or not that even should be published and or what the next steps would be. But what we changed in the draft, in the report, the most recent one, was one pronoun for he, the county administrative officer. It was in an email chain and we believed it to be one male. And when she replied saying, I meant this person, then it was changed. That was the only thing that was changed.
Yeah, and I'm not trying to get into the weeds on specific reports or specific pronouns or things like that. It's just a question of if it's a draft, whether drafts get published or final reports get published and how
Well-
things go out. So I get the point. Thank you.
And I'll just say, I did speak with the vice president of the association last night. And that's why it's called a draft report, because if to the extent that something is pointed out, it then gets changed. That's different than how my 3 colleagues in Maryland do it. They send a final report for comment. Don't make changes if they were raised.
Okay. Ms. Benjamin and then John. I saw Ms. Benjamin saying first.
Since the CAO is not here, I just wanted to point out she would really want to have draft, I guess, investigations for her to, I guess, just like we were just talking about, maybe correct any statements that from her perspective should be changed in the final report. And then from her perspective as well, the timeline for responding to some of these reports. Because most of the reports, and Ms. Madigan can agree that it goes to the CAO and then she has to respond. So in most instances, in all instances, Ms. CAO Rogers will send an email to Ms. Madigan requesting for an extension. Then Ms. Madigan will grant the extension for the CAO to respond, whether it's a month, 2 weeks, 3 weeks, 4 weeks. But Ms. Madigan is gracious enough to work with the CAO when it comes to responding. So I think the CAO's point is, if she has a draft and is able to review the draft and go back to Ms. Madigan, so Ms. Madigan can make the necessary changes, then responding to the final report is easily, it's like a partnership. Not that there's no partnership right now, there is a partnership, but she's requesting that perhaps she can review the draft first, and I may be misspeaking on her behalf, but review the draft so she can go back to Ms. Madigan, make any necessary edits or corrections, not regarding maybe facts that were, from her perspective, not, I'll say, maybe worded correctly. So when that final report comes out, the response is not too time consuming, if that makes sense. And I may be misspeaking for her, but I just wanted to point that out.
Thank you, Ms. Benjamin. John?
Thanks. I feel like it's been a while since we talked about this, and I'm not sure if we got the details or not. But Ms. Madigan, I guess I'm just trying to understand. I understand the draft report goes to the 5 named people, et cetera. Is that draft report available publicly, or is it purely an internal document?
That's an internal document.
So you're saying that you send it to them, they give you a response. That draft and that response are never seen publicly until you issue your final report.
Correct.
Do they? And they just stay in your files and they remain confidential.
Correct.
But you are saying you could not imagine sending a draft report to the target, or whatever the appropriate word is, the subject. And frankly, that's not up to you to do anyway, right? That's really the
No.
disciplinary action would be taken by the county administration using the
Correct.
information provided to them.
Yeah, so I can just speak about the reports that are public, but we've done reports about employees improperly using their email, employees improperly having secondary employment on their Baltimore County computers, employees making inappropriate purchases with their purchase cards. And I am not administration, but I'm also not the decision maker. I am giving the results of an administrative investigation. I am putting the
Right,
reports in the hands of the decision maker. I think
So-
it would be problematic to do that differently.
So in the public record, there is often a final report and I think almost always a response from the administration, usually the CAO, I think, for the ones I've seen. So what you're saying is behind that or in front of that, there's typically a draft report, there's an internal response, then you issue a final report, which then gets a formal response. And that formal response, is that right?
No, that's not right. It's not two separate things. And this is consistent with what every other office does. What I send to them is a draft report.
Mhm.
Most of those reports become the final because I don't make any changes based on their response. But I give myself the opportunity that if they give me some additional information that should be included to change that report. I think we've issued 15 public reports.
Right.
Based on the response, we have changed one report. But as part of the process and consistent with other Inspector General's offices, again, should they choose to comment on the report, they know that whatever they send back is going to be included as part of the final report, because it's the
I guess,
report
yeah,
and the
I mean,
response.
I admittedly, because I'm trying not to focus in this role on the individual reports or cases, I'm trying not to get into these reports, but I'm just trying to understand the process, right? So if you say something in a report and they respond and say, you are wrong on using the judge's ABC, you are wrong on C, and they write to you and they say C is wrong, it should be D. And then you issue a final report where you replace C with D.
Mhm.
Because you just say, oops, I mean, it was just a mistake, but it's a mistake that could be viewed as prejudicial or otherwise inflammatory or whatever. Oops, we made a mistake. You change C to D. So you're now saying that the public record has a response to a report, a final report, saying it should be, C should be D, but the final report to which they're responding has already been corrected to say D and not C?
Correct.
That seems very confusing to me.
Well, that's what every single office does. And I think it's worth noting, I'm not saying that we don't make mistakes. Certainly we make mistakes, but I can't not articulate how much time we spend in drafting the report. We have hundreds of hours into these reports. And in all of the reports that we have issued, I think on two separate occasions. Once, when we said in a report there was no line item, their uniforms were not part of the budget or whatever. We have not made, certainly we've made on two instances something that we've changed, one of which has been a pronoun and one of which has been, well, it's not in a budget item, but there is, they can purchase uniforms, not necessarily boots, but they can purchase uniforms. That's it. There hasn't been any other response that has pointed out. There have been responses that have disagreed with our conclusions, but we haven't had factual differences in our response. And frankly, the one with the pronoun was in an email chain. It referred to one male in that email chain. If you read the email, it would make sense that it would be that male. But when Miss Rogers said, that's not who I was referring to, I gave her the benefit of the doubt and changed the name.
Look, I think, and again, at some point we'll get to deliberations on these issues, but they're public and this is public. So, I mean, it's the same conversation regardless. What I'm struggling with here is, I don't know what the sort of batting average is of IGs in general in terms of making mistakes in their reports, right? And you can certainly see how a mistake could be made in a report that could be very damaging to someone about whom it is written. And in an ideal world, you would like a process that fleshes those out. I don't know what that process looks like. And maybe you're lucky enough that you've only made two minor mistakes and maybe you'll never make another one. And maybe IGs have a high batting average to begin with. I'm just concerned that you have a potential report that is wrong in some respect, that is inflammatory and harmful to somebody, inadvertently, of course. I'm not suggesting it's done, with any sort of intent. And that the opportunity for someone to go, oh, hang on a second, that's just wrong because, and avoiding that issue. Now, I also don't want to chase a theoretical issue, truly. I just don't, right? So I'm just trying to get my arms around, it's not going to be perfect. And frankly, and to be honest, and I'll say this for my colleagues as well, some of whom are lawyers, in the back of my mind, I mean, you get an opinion from the court, whether it's a circuit court or whether it's an appellate court, you don't get to see it before it's issued. And believe me, there's lots of stuff when you read them and you think, oh my God, Judge, how could you say that? That's so wrong. You got it wrong. You accepted something that wasn't true. And now you've said something that sounds awful for my client. And I know objectively it's not true, but that happens every day. So I'm going back and forth here about how much we can avoid this issue.
Well,
And I don't want to chase a theoretical issue, but I just want you to understand what the motivation is. And the other thing I want to say, and we've said this before publicly, is nobody wants a situation where people have the ability to lobby for a different outcome in the report. That is not what this is about. It is merely to avoid factual investigatory errors that could be corrected if there were a process to do that. And the question is it worth the squeeze to do that? Is there a process you could have to do that? Or are we just trying too hard to fix something that, look, it's inherent in the process. Sometimes it's going to happen. That's what we're wrestling with. And that's what I'm wrestling with. And I don't want to speak for others, but that's kind of what brought me to this conversation. And you've been very helpful in what you've said. I'm just trying to give you some feedback, about what we're trying to do here and why. And so that's my thinking.
Can I respond?
Sure, of course.
Well, no, first of all, nobody feels that pressure more than me, which is why, we spend a lot of time. We interview anyone we think is relevant. We pull any documents. We take a lot of time. I think there's a famous saying by Stephen Street that inspector generals can afford to be controversial, but they can't afford to be wrong. And I live with that every single day, that all I have is my credibility and the credibility of the office, and that weighs on me. And when we do reports, not only do they have to be factually accurate, but it's important to know that when the inspector, just because you can speak doesn't necessarily mean you should. And so those are things we wrestle with. To the extent this is an imperfect process, let me tell you that I think we have the best business process over my colleagues in Maryland. To the extent that I've gotten something wrong, I haven't thought about something, you have the top 5 stakeholders, decision makers in county government that are getting copies of every single draft report here's a draft report for your, information. You're the decision maker. To the extent I've gotten something wrong, they want to point out that you didn't have this information, you didn't do this, you didn't do that. Those are the 5 people that should have that report. I can't think of another person who I would want to weigh in on whether or not the report is correct, legally sufficient, factually inaccurate, sees something I haven't seen. And so I realize some of that pressure on me. I have to rely on the administration and our county council to point out if I've misrepresented something, said something incorrectly. And so far that process has worked, but no one feels that pressure more than this role.
I understand, and I appreciate you talking it through with us. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Joanne, you've had your hand up for a while.
Yes, hi, Ms. Madigan. I kind of have like a 2-part question. Obviously, I'm not the attorney here, so I am the advocate. We work on transparency, so we're always thinking about the public's response. And I do think while there's confusion in the reports, eliminating the internal response by the county government when it's been available to the public, I'm not sure the public's response to that would be good, right? So would there be, could it be where within a report itself, if in the instance that the example that John gave, let's say section D is now D or whatever it is, where if a member of the public is reading section C, the original what you've listed originally, where you can put a footnote literally right underneath it saying that this has since been changed, please go to the response, however it is, where that person knows very clearly when reading that report right then and there that that answer has changed. Because I have concerns about getting rid of that now, especially when other jurisdictions are still doing it. I don't think, while I understand the confusion, I don't think rolling back the transparency that exists right now, I don't think the backlash is going to be worth it for the county executive or the council. So would that help? I guess I'm trying to think of the way the reports are laid out. Section C has since been corrected. It was incorrect. If you go here, or maybe it's even a hyperlink, the hyperlink sends them directly to now D, I guess.
I mean, I'm open. So the feedback that I've gotten is that if in getting the response, they have sufficiently convinced me to change something, I make that change.
Okay.
So that's what happens. So if it was C and then they've told me, no, you're wrong, it's D, the report now shows it as D. That C has been removed. If you think it would be helpful to drop a footnote saying that, I don't think that would be helpful. Again, that's because it is the part of the final product is the input from the administration. And again, I've only changed the language in one report, and what we changed was, I think, a pronoun.
Okay.
I think it's very, very important that the public see the response to the Inspector General's report. I used to have them as separate documents. I would have the report and their reply as separate hyperlinks. I think the first two reports that I did were separated that way. I got feedback from the association and from other inspector generals, and I took some time and I looked at how other inspector generals do their reports. It's all one document. The final report, and this is consistent with federal government, it's consistent with the other IGs in Maryland. The final report is my report, and the response, if any, that together with all of my exhibits and their exhibits is the final product.
Okay, I think I may be confusing myself. So you are
Try
saying
again. I could have confused you with my answer, so I'll try again.
No, the answer was helpful, but you are saying that if the county has managed to convince you that this information is correct or incorrect, and you are changing it, C would no longer be included. You are just including D. Okay.
Correct.
And I see Judge wants to go before I.
But like, without beating this to death, the problem is though, and I think that the issue is that you haven't had an instance where this has arisen. So you've corrected the report, C is now D, but the reply is talking about what used to be C and how it should be D. And to the extent in John's example, there was something in a report that was wrong and inflammatory. It's out there in the county's response and not in your report. I mean, to me, the process, I appreciate the fact that you have a draft process, which I think is helpful because everybody wants it to be gotten right. I get how your transparency is leading to you to say I should publish everything. It sounds like to me, though, your final report should be there, and any response the county wants to have to the final report, whether it's the original one they gave you or a new response because the thing they were worried about wasn't there anymore, is what ought to be out there in the public, because otherwise you've got this potentially,
well, that is not
inflammatory thing that's out there, not in your report, but in their report telling you to correct it. It's just.
Well, that's not what any other office does. You would then be in the position of asking the county administrative officer to respond twice.
Correct. And I mean, that's a
not
question for them as to whether they think in the instance where they have persuaded you to correct something, they want a response that then completely, leaves it out there or not. And I think that's their call.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, Miss Rogers and Mr. Benjamin and everyone on those, they're aware that their response to me is the public response. So maybe if they want to send me they're aware of that. I mean, that's their response. I don't change it. They know they encourage me as part of their practice to be printing their response. So that's,
But in the scenario where D has replaced C, and let's say, you know, you've decided to move forward with continuing to release the internal report, because I didn't think of it the way that the judge says, right? C no longer is on there. Would it be feasible to include, to say, here's what C originally said, just so that the response, but that gets messy too, because now you're putting out incorrect information that is not factually correct.
I can just tell you that this process is what every other office does.
Okay.
I thought you said no other office sent draft reports.
Well, they do in Jefferson Parish in Louisiana. I mean, the process is the same in that there's one report, there's a response, if it's a draft or a final, and those are coupled together. That's the same.
Okay. And my follow-up question was going to be, could there be an instance where you sent a draft report based on the response you have decided? I don't think that has happened so far, at least to our knowledge, where you've decided that this report should no longer be released, I guess. Or maybe you've decided to make it, I think it was Montgomery County that told us they have internal reports. So maybe in the personnel example, for example.
I have those, we have those, we
you've
have
done those internal, okay,
we have.
thank you.
And Mr. Benjamin and Mrs. Benjamin have both been recipients of those reports.
Got it, thank you.
Okay, if there are no other questions on that, we will move. Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I did have my hand up, and we talked around it, maybe just for clarity. In the investigative process, there's a process to an investigation, whether it's witness statements, collecting documents, whatever you have created in your investigative plan, you're going along that route to then collect the documents. At some point, you have a draft. During your process, are witnesses given the opportunity to review their statements to make a correction, or are they given the opportunity to sign that statement, or is it?
So witnesses don't make
interrogatories. I'm sorry.
No witnesses don't make statements. We record their interviews and we listen to those recordings for a very extended period of time to make sure that we capture with accuracy what they said.
That transcript from their interview becomes their statement, and that's just included in the record of your investigation?
So there are no transcripts. We re-listen to the interviews, and we do that because the accuracy of what someone says is of the utmost importance to us. All of the documents that we've gathered, all of the interviews, responses, emails are part of the record. They're not included as exhibits, but they're part of our internal file.
Okay, so the document that is created, those documents never become public, if you will, the actual, it's a summary. So the interrogatories, they don't sign, they don't review their statement.
We don't do it.
When I say statement, whether it's verbal or whether it's written, whoever it is, they don't get an opportunity to review their statement.
We don't do interrogatories.
Okay.
When their statement is their consensual interview that's recorded.
Okay.
And I haven't yet had the scenario where someone has said to us or an attorney has said to us that is an inaccurate representation of what was said. And that is something that we are very cognizant of when we're summarizing or when we're explaining. We're going back and we're listening to the recording because that is the best evidence of what was said and what wasn't said.
Then when you get to the end and you create your document, your draft document, I'm trying to understand if it's a draft, and I guess it really goes back to the conversation we're having about if there's a correction that needs to be made, regardless of how often this has happened or not happened. If there's something that one of those three people want to comment on as a correction, it's part of the then final investigation. Is that correct?
I don't know that I understand your question, but I think the answer is yes.
If someone wants to comment on if Ms. Benjamin has provided a document and she wants to comment on your draft, she provides you a comment back, and you could add that to your draft document, which becomes final.
Correct.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Okay. Cindy, did I see your hand earlier?
Yes, and honestly, I don't remember what it was anymore, but thank you.
My apologies. Okay, Joanne.
I have one quick question. Are there limits on the number of responses? So county responds with a correction, you respond, like how much? I know we don't have instances like that. I think there's one where you issue a response to the county, but could in that instance, the county respond again?
Yeah, no, I don't think so. To me, this is the lawyer in me that there is, there is direct, there's cross, and then there's redirect. There is no such thing as recross. And if we have issued a reply, it has been because the county has not responded to what was raised in the report. That was the purpose of a reply.
Okay. Okay. So, I know that we've kind of hit that time period where the persons from the county may need to leave. There were two other really quick questions that I think we had. One had to do with your peer reviews, Ms. Madigan, that and congratulations that you'll finally get to do that. But who will get that peer review report? Will that be made public, or is that something that just goes to you, or?
Oh, I intend to make that public. That's consistent with what my colleague in the city did, Ms. Cumming. Yeah, I shared with Mr. Chair the fact that it's really exciting news that based on some of the comments, it was my intention to apply for peer review anyways. I technically am not even eligible for peer review until the office has been in existence for 3 years, which would be October of 2023. But I applied early and asked for the peer review to be conducted in the fall. And today, in fact, I heard back from them that they are going to conduct that peer review. The office will get the results, and we intend to publish the results on the website.
Thank you. And the other question revolves around reimbursement of personal legal expenses. And one of the questions we had has to do with union representation. Are union representatives allowed to accompany individuals during an interview with the OIG?
Of course, that hasn't happened yet. There are, I think, 6,500 Baltimore County employees, and a very, very small percentage of those, in fact, belong to a union. It's for the most part, it would be police officers, fire, correctional officers. I think that there are perhaps some doctors. I would defer to Miss Benjamin. Sorry, Rhoda, didn't mean to be familial there. If anyone had a request to have a union representative, that's a Supreme Court case of Weingarten rights. That hasn't come up yet. For the most part, if we are conducting those interviews, they have been done at the request of the interviewee, and they have not brought a union representative with them. However, based on that Supreme Court case, while the union representative is allowed to be present, they are not allowed to ask questions, which I think is a different posture than if someone wanted to have an attorney. If someone brought an attorney with them, has been my practice, I give the attorney all of the documents in advance. I talk with the attorney over the phone about what the issues are, what the questions are going to be, and there's a discussion during the interview that the attorney is allowed to participate in.
Okay. And in your opinion, if someone does bring an attorney and they are the target of an investigation but exonerated, should they be reimbursed for an attorney?
I don't think so. I would defer to Mr. Benjamin and or others on this, but these are administrative investigations. So if someone has been accused of doing something improperly and were the subject of an IG investigation, I'm not sure how they would be exonerated. There's no process for that. Again, in essence, there's no Sixth Amendment right to counsel. It is a interview based on wrongful conduct that is related to fraud, waste, misconduct. And that's why we're interviewing someone. Should someone choose to have an attorney, that's their choice. And I don't believe that Baltimore County should reimburse them. There's nothing that an employee could say to me that would cause them to be the subject of a criminal investigation that would lead to like potentially exoneration. If they said something to me that they want to tell me that they committed a crime, I'm going to have other hurdles to pass to then have that interview sent over for criminal prosecution. I have to prove it's voluntary. There's going to be K-line and Weingarten rights for U.S. attorneys and all of that. So the fact that I'm conducting an administrative investigation and questioning someone, which, you know, as part of the statute, they have a duty to cooperate with the investigation. It's really their choice to get a lawyer.
Thank you. Thank you, Ms. Benjamin. I see you.
Yeah, I was just gonna say, I agree with Ms. Madigan. The county should not be, if an employee chooses to bring an attorney to an OIG investigation, the county should not be liable to pay for their attorney fees. That I don't think that's done anywhere that I'm aware of, so.
And I would concur with Ms. Benjamin on that, Mr. Chair.
Okay, thank you. Thank you. Okay, so commissioners, any other questions before we allow county staff persons to get on with their lives? If not,
I had a number of other questions that were posed to me that we haven't. Do you want me to submit answers in writing?
well, let's see if we can get to those. I'm sorry, I apologize if we didn't get to all of them. I'm looking at a different list, so. So Ms. Madigan, were there other responses that you wanted
He's
to
on
go?
mute,
Well,
Mr. Chair.
Oh, I was just noting for the record. I mean, I'm happy to go. I have 2 kids that have been unsupervised for an extended amount of time, but I received a list of 11 questions related to the Ethics Commission that I was asked for answers on. I didn't know if you wanted to discuss this or you want me to answer them in writing.
Okay, I'm going to say that you can answer them in writing, but let me ask the other commissioners, were there any questions that are outstanding that you just really feel like you need to have responses to tonight?
I just have a quick question. I guess it's more for Ms. Benjamin. Are there employees right now who have gone and got their own representation who think that they are going to get a reimbursement, be reimbursed for them legal fees? If so, like, how does the county, like, are you all planning to notify them in some way? Because that did seem to be, we were under that impression. There were some people that seemed as though, or they thought that they were promised reimbursement for getting attorneys.
I would not know because I'm not privy to some of the investigations. I mean, all of the investigations that the OIG conducts and who she's talking to and who brings their representative. I'm not privy to that. But if they came to me and asked that question, I would wholeheartedly tell them that they will not get reimbursed for it. There's not a process right now, even for reimbursement for that.
And I would say that in all of the hundreds of interviews we've conducted, a very, very small percentage of those have been accompanied with an attorney.
Okay, thank you. And Ms. Madigan, the questions with regard to the Ethics Commission, I believe that they were just more detailed questions. And so I think that we've gotten the responses that we need to this point. If we do need additional information, then we will request that. But for our purposes, I think we did. So thank you.
Okay, you're welcome. Thank you.
Once again,
Thank you.
just check in and just make sure that no other questions before we allow our guests to leave. If not, Ms. Benjamin, Mr. Benjamin, Ms. Madigan, Mr. Freed, we appreciate you joining us tonight. And I think you've been very helpful with your responses. So thank you again.
Thank you so much
you
for
all.
the
Have a great
opportunity and for your
Thank you
hard
for your
work.
work.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Okay, so we're going to move to discussion of reports to be delivered in our interim report to the county executive and the county council president. That report is due on Tuesday. And so because of the upcoming holiday, they would like a copy of our report on Friday. So we're going to submit it on Friday. And the plan is for the report to include the following items. First, the report with the findings of the ethical climate survey conducted by the Schaefer Center. The report with the findings of best practices of offices of Inspector General conducted by the Schaefer Center. And then also our draft recommendations from this commission. And so the first question is, does anyone have any concerns about including the reports on the ethical climate survey and the best practices of OIGs with the interim report? Any concerns with that? If not, can I have a motion to include the recommendation in the interim report? And when I say the recommendation, I mean those two reports, climate survey and best practices reports.
So moved.
Okay, and second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor? If you can just raise hands, aye. Okay, anyone opposed? Okay, thank you. So those reports will be included in our draft report. Next, we're going to walk through the issues that we reached consensus on at our last meeting, and then we'll go through the issues where there was general consensus on the recommendation, but some additional concerns. And so as we go through these items, we'll vote on if the recommendation can be included in the interim report. And so I want to encourage all of our commission members to think about the language of the recommendations, and I think they'll be shown and remind you that these will be included as draft recommendations. So we can revisit these recommendations at our next and final meeting on February 2nd. But if you have any concerns about the wording, please voice your issues. And so with that, then we will move to look at those. And I'm sorry. They're up on your screen, and I just need to enlarge mine so I can actually read them. And so the first one is the commission recommends that Baltimore County maintain the current structure with the Office of Inspector General, maintaining the responsibility for investigations only and the audit function remaining separate from the OIG. And so there's some clarification there in terms of the draft language, and that is structure versus scope of responsibility or practice, if we want to change that language. So,
Scope of responsibility is probably clearer.
okay, scope of responsibility.
Mr. Chair, Cynthia and Tom both have something they want, have their hands raised.
Okay, please, Cindy and then Tom.
I was going to suggest division of responsibility.
Okay. Any discussion on that division? And I'm sorry, again, I'm just trying to enlarge my screen. Okay, here we go. So that I can see everyone. Okay, and Tom, you had
I was going to suggest we replace structure with practice, but I'm equally fine with division of responsibility, so I'll withdraw that.
okay. So where the commission recommends that Baltimore County maintain the current division of responsibility with the Office of the Inspector General maintaining the responsibility for investigations only and the audit function remaining separate from the OIG. So is everyone comfortable with this language? Any comments or changes? If not, can I have a motion to include the recommendation in the interim report?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
okay, all in favor?
Aye.
Okay,
Aye.
anyone opposed? So thank you. So this recommendation will be included in our draft report. Next is communicating about new investigations with county or agency leadership. The commission recommends that the OIG not be obligated to notify supervisors or agency heads before conducting interviews. However, the OIG should promote an atmosphere of cooperation within county government, where doing so does not impede an investigation. The OIG should consider sharing information concerning a referral with an agency head or supervisor to help secure cooperation and assistance within a group, and to ensure that information relevant to the investigation is received by the OIG. However, the commission is not recommending the creation of a policy that requires the OIG to clear things in advance or schedule through agency heads. So any comments or changes to this recommendation? Okay, if not, can I have a motion to include the recommendation in the interim report?
So moved.
Second,
Second.
all in favor?
Aye.
Yeah.
Mr. Chairman, can I ask you a quick question? Maybe I just didn't capture process this. The interim report is what versus the final report, and it's being delivered when and with what? Just walk me through that one more sec, please.
So the interim report will include this, as will the final report, include the two reports that were issued by the University of Baltimore, their research, and then also will include our recommendations, our draft recommendations. And that interim report will go to the county executive and the president of the county council on Friday. And then we will come back on, I believe it's February 2nd, to finalize the draft report, basically.
Well, does that mean that we are only, I'm looking at this agenda, which has two chunks of recommendations, as we all know. Are you suggesting that the interim report would include everything we resolve on all of them, or only some of them with some more to come later if there is not yet consensus? I'm just trying to understand the scope of the interim report.
So yeah, for the interim report, we are going to, as many as we can resolve tonight, we want to resolve, basically, and we will include those in the interim report. Any that we're not able to resolve tonight, then we will resolve, and they will be included in the final report. And the county executive and president of council will be made aware, that there are other possible recommendations coming in the final report.
And respectfully, this is necessary. Why?
That's the way we were constructed. So if I'm saying that correctly.
I guess I'm just, I don't know what the purpose is of the interim report, which either has neither final recommendations nor a complete set of them. And frankly, it seems to me to be potentially confusing. I suppose you will flag in the report, this is an interim report. It only covers, these are recommendations. They're not final and they're not all of them, but here's where we stand at this point in time. I suppose if that's what we're required to do, we should do it. But I would insist that we be as clear as we possibly can, because it just seems to me to be an unnecessary interim step. But, that's my concern.
Mr. Chair, I can add to that.
Yes.
Hi, this is Ann Cotton. Yes, we're required, we being the commission is required to issue an interim report. It's part of the charter for the commission. The interim report will have whatever language is actually approved tonight in terms of recommendations, but it won't have any of the supporting documentation for the recommendations yet. And all that will be in the final report. So only exactly what's approved tonight in this text is what's going to be included under the recommendations. With I noticed that additional recommendations are coming. These are subject to change as commission and decides that they need to be changed.
So and just to that last point, you're also going to note that these interim recommendations that we were approving tonight, we're only approving on a tentative basis.
Well, you're approving them, but the commission reserves the right to, if something comes up between now and the final report, that they can be changed. And it's clear that it's interim and this is what's been approved to date.
Will you be describing in any way the issues that are unresolved, or will we just be silent on those issues in the interim report?
There's the list of issues that we have tonight will be included, but there's no content. They're just, these are the remaining issues that the commission is looking at. And they come right from the agenda.
Sandy?
Yes, is there anyone on this call who happens to have a copy of the executive order and can tell us whether it says simply that we're supposed to issue an interim report, or whether it also says what the interim report is to include, which I think is kind of goes to the crux of what John is saying. I don't recall it saying what the interim report has to include. I share the view that under some circumstances, we have very little time left in this particular meeting this evening, but I could imagine where having an interim report and a final report that address the same issues without really detailing out what one is supposed to be as opposed to the other could be confusing. And so I'm wondering whether, when we say we're supposed to do an interim report, is it actually the case that we're supposed to do an interim report that has these recommendations that are in the report, but nonetheless are not the final recommendations?
And the executive order is on the website for the commission.
Okay, thank you.
And to answer your question, I don't know that it details the interim report. I know that it says, that we do have to provide an interim report.
Mr. Chair, it looks like Tom has his hand up.
Yes, so
I was just saying, I think you're right. I'm looking at the executive order. It just says you issue an interim report to the county executive and county council not later than, but it doesn't say what needs to be in that interim report.
So is one of the reasons for that so that the county executive's office and the county council can respond to it or make suggestions? I'm still wondering, without a direction in the executive order as to what the content is supposed to be, I'm still just a little unclear on all that.
It wouldn't surprise me if it's just the rhythm of these things that sometimes, you just have this kind of interim then followed by a final, but that doesn't mean it makes sense in this particular application. I mean,
I'm going to say is common, like other commissions do release interim reports. It usually includes some of where the commission has agreement. I'm not sure why. I don't know why it's needed, but it could be also to justify, I mean, our meetings are public, but in some ways to justify the cost of the work that I really don't know, but it is just common that commissions release interim reports with some of their recommendations so far, or just explaining some of where there's agreement or disagreement.
Well, yeah.
I'm not making the case for it.
If you have a commission that runs for 2 years and someone says at the 1 year mark, you should issue an interim report, I guess I understand that. Look, whatever. I mean, it's all public. Anybody who's interested can, so I didn't mean to provoke a whole thing. It just seems to me to be potentially confusing, but if we're told to issue an interim report and that's the interim report that we're teeing up to provide, I suppose it's okay. It just seems a little bit of a, sort of square peg in a round hole, but we'll get there soon enough. So I just wanted to raise it.
Mm-hmm. Okay, it is a requirement, and therefore we're following the requirement. I didn't ask why, but in my time in government, it has not been unusual, for an interim report to be required. So we're providing it as required. And anyone else have any unreadiness with? Okay. Sorry, John, I don't have a better answer for you.
No, whatever. I don't, like I said, carry on.
I mean, I will say though, can we ask, like, include in there, like whether or not, I mean, I don't know if a response is needed because we've had them come, but if there are concerns about some of the direction that we're headed in, at least, that would be helpful to know.
I'm sorry, now you're taking me down a path, and I'm not prepared for an interim report followed by comments for that we then revise.
Oh, yeah, because then we only have a meeting left. Yeah. Okay.
No, it's just not that,
Yeah.
if they want a status check on where we are, here's a status check. The meetings are public. We've had plenty of participation and, I'm sorry, I would object to that. And you can ask, but I doubt very much that that's what they had in mind, but, I would not be in favor of that.
I don't believe that's what they had in mind either. And I don't know, and whether you would know, better about that than I do.
No, I don't know to the intention because this was all drafted before we were involved with it in terms of the executive order, the original executive order. But the intention is really just to present the best practices report, the ethical climate report, and whatever recommendations the commission agrees to tonight to just share those. And as John has pointed out, they've all been made public anyway, so it's just including them in a written form. The final report will have all the context for all the recommendations, including why something is an issue, what any issues that the commission has discussed, and then whatever the recommendation is. And the commission members will have all that in time to actually review in case there are changes or comments that need to be made.
Okay. So in the interest of time, I'm going to go ahead and soldier on so that we can get some of this done. Again, I don't foresee changes being requested or made. These are recommendations. And so, they can either accept them or not accept them. And so, this has to do with the rights of investigation.
Mr. Chair?
Yes.
Cindy has a hand up.
Yes.
Thank you. So just to be clear, when we agree on any one of these snippets that we're seeing, we're agreeing to it as draft language, or we are agreeing to it as final language. It sounds like you're saying we're agreeing to it as draft language because the interim report is kind of a draft report.
Correct. We're agreeing to it as draft language. And so, if you kind of rethink the language before the final report, we'll have an opportunity to make those changes and then vote on the final language. Okay. Am I missing any other hands up? Okay. Okay, so this is rights of investigation witnesses. The commission recommends that the rights of investigation witnesses be clearly identified in a written policies and procedures manual. It would be best practice to include clarification on the following: the definition of an investigative interview as opposed to a background meeting, how to notify someone that they are being asked to participate in an interview, what interviewees should expect in an interview, who may be present during an interview, the role of counsel if they are permitted to attend the interview, and the policy on recordings. All of these policies should clear. I think that should be clear and ambiguous and readily available on the OIG's website. Any comments or
I
changes?
would recommend that the language be clear. It's a little, language needs to be tweaked. Rights of investigation witness. Now I'm editing, I guess, so maybe that's not the purpose of this, but rights of investigation witnesses, is it just witness process or interview process? Or, I mean, it's an investigation because I don't think they do inquiries. So I think everything is an investigation. The topic is not clear to me. And then,
so if it's the rights of witnesses, not investigation witnesses, just witnesses?
Is it the rights? It's not necessarily, I don't know, is it a right? Rights mean something. So I don't know if they have rights because I don't know if they have a policy that outlines the rightness of a witness. So that's why I'm trying to make it more general about preparing something for the process that involves witnesses in the investigative process that will outline their rights and clarifies how that process works. And maybe it's not that, maybe if it's clear to everyone else, and I'm good.
No, I see Kathy and Cindy both have your hands raised. So,
I think that the language could be cleaned up in a number of respects. I would say the commission recommends that the internal policies and procedures be clearly identified in a written that's a little redundant. Internal practices be clearly identified in a written policies and procedures manual. Might be a little clearer. It would be. And then it would be best practice to include clarification on the following. And then that list that was there were some of the things we had discussed. So the first one, definition of investigative interview as opposed to a background meeting. And I would change the language instead of how to be standard practice on notifications to be given for potential witnesses or interviewees. The rest of that stuff is generally okay, but the other things that we had discussed that should be included in that was something about the duty to cooperate for county employees, something to include information regarding whistleblower protection and confidentiality policies. So, I mean, I would just tweak this a little to be inclusive of all of the things that we had discussed.
Is the intent, just, I guess it goes back to the previous question, is the intent that we're going to do, have a draft, every draft session? Is that really what we're gonna do in real time? Because like this is,
So I would think from our perspective, we should just share this and let commission, since we don't have all the language completely clear on this, we
yeah,
should share this with the commission, let members actually make edits, and then we can see if we can come to consensus on that, since it's language and not really content.
Mr. Chairman,
Shared doc, like where we can jointly, that way we're not each making edits separately. If we could put a shared Google Doc or something, or we can suggest edits, that would be great.
I mean, I think editing by committee is problematic though, because we got, 10 people that are going to be putting comments in and what's accepted and what isn't,
right.
I guess
This-
can it go back to the subcommittees to edit, to wordsmith for the commission as a whole to vote on at the next meeting?
But I thought this needs to go
Mr.
out
Chairman,
on
can I-
Friday. Sorry.
can I make this?
yeah, John.
I don't know. I mean, this is just taking me back to my earlier point, and I feel much more strongly about this now after this. I strongly recommend that we do not include draft, interim, or other recommendations in whatever it is we're submitting this week. Because the recommendations are based upon predicate facts, that there's background information. I want to see it all together. And I know that you're going to say that it's not final until it's final, but if we give 7 interim recommendations, there will be 7 interim recommendations reported in the media, because that's reasonable. That's what the media should do. It's just going to create confusion. There's no reason that we should be providing interim recommendations that might be revised on a subset of topics in advance of the others. And it's just going to create, among people who are interested in this, why is that? Why is that? And then people are going to be lobbying us to make changes. It's exactly what we just talked about for the IG. Just we can go through this process with separate conversation about how to finalize the recommendations. If we have to provide an interim report, the interim report, in my view, should be, here are the raw materials we gathered, and here is a report on where we are and what we're going to do. That's an interim report. Interim report is not some of the recommendations which are not yet final, and there may be more to come, and we'll let you know. I just don't understand the purpose of that. And absent someone telling us explicitly that's what we should do, I think it is asking for trouble for absolutely no reason. So I feel very strongly about that. I don't know what process others want to follow to weigh in on that. That is separate from this question about how we're going to finalize these things. But I just, you can just see right now, I mean, we're going to end up fooling around with these things, and we should until they're done. And they may change based upon the wrapper that they're wrapped in terms of background and information and fact gathering. So that's my view.
I would
I'm not
concur.
voting for these tonight to be included.
I would concur.
Same. I think if this is due Friday and there's no time for us to like really, suggest changes and then meet to finalize those, I agree with John.
I do as well.
Cindy has her hand up.
Yeah, I had my hand up because of another suggestion regarding this one, which it sounds like we may or may not go any further on right now, but I'll just say briefly that I think that the use of witnesses is confusing. The Inspector General is not conducting hearings, and Judge Cox already, I guess in what she was doing, the word witness had come out where it had been in the body, but I would like the word witness not to be at the top, because it's not just people who could be witnesses if there were going to be a trial, which I don't think there would be, but it's really anyone who is being interviewed or participating in the process. Or it's even, perhaps even somebody who would be essentially a respondent, who may, I would imagine any such person would be interviewed, but in case they weren't. Overall, however, I totally agree with what John said as to how we should handle this interim report.
Okay, Kathy, is your hand raised, or is that from previous?
Yes, it is. To John's point, and perhaps as kind of a compromise on this, because we want some substance to what we're sending them. Perhaps that we include the two reports and say that the commission is finalizing, we've met, we've done this, we're finalizing our recommendations around the following topics. List the topics and don't put the final language in, and let us properly debate the final language. And on this one, Cindy's completely right. I think that the topic should be reframed as investigative practices, and just get the whole, because it's got it. But if we list topics, we're finalizing recommendations around them. I think we should spend a lot of time debating the language and get it right. And I share John's concern that we're going to tweak and change language and then have people wonder why we took things in or out. It just confuses it.
To your point, this whole subject could have its own paragraph or page or however. I mean, there are a lot more things that go under that, and we could clarify what that means.
Yep.
Okay,
I completely agree with Judge Cox's suggestion about listing topics is perfectly reasonable. I wasn't suggesting we wouldn't do that. I mean, I think we can certainly do that. There are even other things we can include, just not the recommendations at this point.
okay. So it sounds like there's a consensus that the interim report will include the two reports that presented by the University of Baltimore, and then just list the topics that we will be making recommendations on. Is that correct?
Correct, yes.
Okay. Since there's an unreadiness to vote. And so the other part of that is, would the subcommittees be willing to work on wordsmithing in those areas that you were working on? And then that would mean the February 2nd meeting, the entire meeting would be geared towards final recommendations.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah, agree.
Okay. Okay. Anne, did you see that as being a problem at all?
No, I don't.
From a advisory standpoint. Okay.
The substantive nature of the recommendations have already been discussed, and this is wordsmithing in a group like this is kind of difficult for everybody.
I agree. Okay,
Now, may I ask one other question? The two chunks of topics on the agenda, 5 and 6. Mr. Chair, you introduced those as the first topic where we basically had consensus, and clearly we do. I mean, even on this one where people are changing words around, it's not because there's an absence of consensus. We're just trying to get the language right. But in the agenda item 6, which has 9 points in it, those are ones where we've determined that we haven't quite gotten as far. Is that the difference between group 1 and group 2?
yes. Yes, it is.
So is it useful to talk about group 2 to see if we can reach a consensus on them? I mean, is that where, I don't know where we are in the process, but because that would advance them potentially to the level of the group 1 recommendations and allow us to treat them all equally.
Yeah, that I have no problem with doing that if everyone agrees that would be the best use of our remaining time.
I agree.
So we have a group that we had general consensus on. That's group 2, if I'm not mistaken. Are you seeing that, John, as group 2, beginning with written policies and procedures? Let's see.
My group 1 was on the agenda, beginning with the ones that have slides,
Yes,
which are 9. It's number 5 and there are 9. And then there's a number 6 on the agenda, there also are 9.
and that's these items.
Right.
Okay. So beginning with staffing. Okay, so if we agree, yeah, let's see if we can talk through those and make any headway with those.
If I could jump in, I feel like number 2 might be an easy one. If we agree with the recommendations from Ms. Madigan, I think the committee was already leaning towards, not providing any reimbursements. And I think if I'm correct, based on her, or maybe from the CAO staffer, they pretty much said that they don't plan on reimbursing even if the person was somehow cleared. I guess, if I'm correct, Judge, I don't. But it sounded like they were saying no reimbursements. They don't plan to reimburse anyone at all.
They're opposed to it. I agree that that's where they were. I think, and we were clear that we were saying people should get counsel at their own expense. The only thing that we had asked for additional input on for tonight was whether there should be a process if somebody is, call it exonerated or whatever, that they could petition and it could be considered. I'm kind of where you are, Joanne. I think that's a can of worms to open up for something that, as a practical matter, it's a theoretical problem, not an actual problem. So I would recommend that, that we stay out of this area, and that people bear, that they can bring counsel, but at their own expense if they choose to.
One of the things that we do on the federal side is that it's in the training. This point is included in the training, whether it's ethics training or whether it's IG training, it's in there. And then executives are reminded that they could always buy insurance.
Okay. So our recommendation here is that the county not reimburse personal legal expenses, basically. It's correct. Without getting any other.
Agreed.
Okay.
Can we move to the next one?
Yep. So we'll jump back up to number 1, staffing. And I think that we talked about just using language to the effect of appropriate staffing or something like that. Is that correct? Let me see. Let me make sure. Okay, let's because we were discussing funding source, and I don't know if we really want to get into that. And if the OIG and ethics commissions are separated, how would this affect the OIG staffing? But I think that can be resolved as well. I think we just want to make sure that the OIG has adequate staffing.
So can I suggest that the staff of the commission draft something consistent with the sense of the commission regarding adequate staffing, et cetera, and submit it to us in advance of the next meetings? Because what I'm trying to do is to get these things all in a one category, which is like, we've agreed to this, here's some language, and now we have to work on the language rather than have two completely separate buckets.
Well, and I think there is language in I don't have the statute right in front of me right now, or I think there's language in there about it being staffed. So I'm not sure we have to tweak a whole lot there. But agreed, I agree with John. I agree with what you're saying.
Okay. And we may simply want to say, that the OIG and the Ethics Commission have adequate staffing, since we're recommending that they be separated. So the third one was financial independence. And there were concerns about the current language in the county code regarding the justification required for reducing the OIG's budget and the possibility of providing an impact statement in the county code about how a reduction in the OIG's budget would affect the office and its operations. So
I think, and people will have to check. I think we concluded at the last discussion that we wanted to enhance the language around financial independence, enhance the language around disclosure of any budget cuts. I don't have my notes, I'm sorry, on this item, but there were things we were talking about doing to the existing language that says, because the existing language says any reduction must be, explained, et cetera. But I also think, and you'll forgive me, Tom, I think the consensus was that we were not going to do sort of a percent of the budget, et cetera. I think we talked that through, but I might be wrong. It does reflect my view, but maybe we hadn't finally come to a conclusion. We talked about strengthening this language, adding what we could add without going so far as to talk about percent of budget, et cetera. But maybe I'm misremembering, so I'll defer to the group.
That was correct. My note, John, says that in fact you were going to work on some language for the code regarding it.
I will gladly do that, and I apologize.
Tom, I see your hand. And then
I under this topic, I thought we had reached a consensus that if we're not going to go with the funding based on a percentage of the general operating budget, that we try to provide a greater level of financial independence by moving the language of the statute into the county charter.
Yeah, we did say that.
We did say that. That is
That's
correct.
the county charter and language that,
yes,
adequately funded. I think that was what it said.
yes.
Yes.
Cindy, is your hand raised, or is that from the last time?
I think that's what we agreed last time.
Okay.
And to add a statement in the county charter, that section of the county charter, that the OIG shall be adequately funded.
Correct.
Okay.
And I was advocating for making a percentage, but I think John is correct that the consensus was not to do that.
Can I ask
I
a
also
point of
think-
clarification? Are we saying that the language creating the OIG should be in the
Yes.
charter?
Yes, I think it's not really covered in this list, but I think the discussion was, and we should revisit it as necessary, that we thought that the entirety of the OIG law should be put in the charter to give it greater permanence and so on and so on. I think that was the discussion. I believe it was a conclusion. Someone would have to check as well.
I agree.
I agree.
Yes. And Cindy, your hand raise function is still on. I'm not sure whether that's from previously or,
It was from before.
okay, thank you. Okay, so if we're ready to move to number 4, then unrestricted access to materials, which we had some discussion of tonight.
I think the discussion was helpful in clarifying that I think unrestricted access exists. What was being discussed is whether there should be direct access. To the extent that the IG doesn't have direct access. I personally found it persuasive that there's certain things that make that impractical in terms of the way the county's IT department is there. Maybe we should just add language to what John read aloud that talks about or suggest an addition of language to the extent that they don't have direct access to materials, that there be confidentiality honored on sort of requests, and that the IG's requests for materials not be shared beyond those required to provide access to the materials that they seek, something like that.
Right. The other thing is the HR director tonight talked about, and I wouldn't know how to implement this or whether it's appropriate or consistent with other things, that there some sort of confidentiality agreement to be signed by people. Now, I would think, frankly, that they would have to sign such an agreement otherwise for other reasons, but perhaps we could just simply look into that. I thought it was a good suggestion, but it seems to me, I mean, it just seems like that would already be in place if you were in the IT department in the county and had access to all of that information. Maybe we could run that down.
Yeah.
Okay. And also ensure that persons within the Office of Inspector General have signed a similar confidentiality agreement. Just. Okay. Number 5, if we're ready to move on, draft report notification and response period. Again, we've had some discussion tonight about that as well.
It sounds like my take on the gist of what this comes down to is they actually have a draft policy and response practice. It's not in writing. And my takeaway from this is I think that there should be a written policy to establish what the draft report process is, the response time. And I think we should clarify what gets published, because while I understand what was being said, I think the OIG's final report and any response the county wants to have to that final report should be what is published. Otherwise, I honestly just believe it's confusing. And well, an instance has not yet occurred where there's been a meaningful correction to a draft. You could see how that could occur, and it would be unfortunate to have a response published to something that is out of a report.
Okay.
Cindy has her hand up.
Yes.
And my suggestion would be that we clarify that, and I think we talked about this in our subcommittee, that there would be like separate links to the more than one report.
I'll
Should
just
there
say
be-
that of all the issues we've touched on generally, and even tonight, I'm still a little bit uncertain about this. I think it's fine to continue the process of trying to refine, because I think this is helpful too, but I need to think just a little bit more about, about this, the back and forth, the rhythm of draft report, et cetera, et cetera. I mean, I think I made my comments earlier. I just, I don't want to chase a ghost here, if it's really not a problem. There's just something sort of a little bumpy about it, but on the other hand, if it's really not causing a problem, I don't know that we can, I don't want to try and strive for some sort of perfect thing if it really isn't an issue. But I'm not quite there yet personally.
Kathy said something else that I missed when you were talking about the draft policy, existing practice and written process and timeline, and there was something else that you said.
Well, and honestly, and to John's point again, I mean, maybe it ought to be just that the policy on the draft report, who it's published to, what the response policy is, be clarified. And then only final reports be published.
You know, I'm trying, and you heard it, I'm trying to understand all the sides of this, and I certainly understand what the IG is saying, that this, and I know that, you know, nobody here is trying to allow folks to lobby a report into submission. We're just trying to protect against obvious, you know, inevitable errors. And I don't accept the fact that, you know, it's hard to accept the fact that there are so few errors, or that there will always be so few errors. Good for the current, you know, IG that there are so few, but so I don't know. I'm, like I said, I've just got to think it through for my own self, but others may have a clearer, you know, picture of what they want to do.
Mhm. Okay. Okay, are we ready to move to number 6, accountability mechanisms? I know that we didn't have consensus on this issue, and there was a request for additional time for fact finding. I'm not sure that we really learned anything new from any other entities. Are there any recommendations we want to consider making with regard to this, or no recommendation?
The only I have one sort of, I think, fairly narrow recommendation, and maybe a broader one, which it would be sort of a new topic, but something we could put a pin in. It's not complicated. The accountability one would be at least getting rid of 3 to 5 years, and the review, which is, and I don't know, maybe I've never been able to distinguish accountability from oversight. I think they were both something I was partly assigned in our subcommittee, and I think I've always reported on them together because I'm not totally sure what the difference is, although I could be educated. But I think the 3 to 5 year peer review makes no sense. I would just pick a number. I want it to be 3, but I guess I wouldn't mind asking for some advice, you know, like I don't know, but it should be something that makes sense. So that's the first thing. And the second thing I want to just throw out there, and we certainly can talk about it maybe when we're doing the final recommendations, is whether we should recommend another local blue ribbon look like this in some fixed period of time as this office continues to evolve. I'm not suggesting, Mr. Chair, that we should discuss or debate it tonight, but I want to at least introduce it so that people could think about it, because to me, that's another way. I mean, I think that this office is growing. There's a lot of good stuff going on, certainly some course corrections and some ratifications of fundamental things that we've done. I mean, I think this is going to be very constructive. I think it would be useful to have that done again at some point. And, you know, I don't have a strong feeling about exactly what that point is, but I could see how in another X number of years, I'll just say 5, for example, a group like this could take a look at it and sort of go, all right, how are we doing now? And I wouldn't think it'd be a bad thing to have a hook to hang that on in you know, when that happens. So I'll just leave it there. Maybe we can talk about it, you know, in due course.
Okay, any other thoughts with regard to this?
As we talked about, the only other, maybe a recommendation is not really accountability, but kind of is a requirement or strongly worded suggestion that the IG received ongoing continuing education and make it mandatory that an annual conference or some sort of update is the legal course, something is required annually.
And we would be recommending that that be included in the IG's budget.
Absolutely.
Okay. And with the guy, okay, Tom.
Yeah, I'm not sure about this, but it may be that in terms of continuing education, it's already taken care of in the status quo as part of the accreditation process that she has to go through. So it may be superfluous, but I'm not positive about that.
Yeah, to remain a certified inspector general, there is some continuing education requirement, but I don't know that there's a requirement within county statute that she be certified. So it would be two different entities, making that requirement.
So is the recommendation then that the IG be certified?
I'm open. I don't hear what others are thinking.
I'm not sure, but I think you can't get certified until you've been in IG.
Oh,
That was what the problem was, where, remember that Ms. Madigan wanted to be able to be part of that organization, the IG organization, but she had to first get this title to even be allowed to be part of the group. And I think they are the people who do that kind of training. So although I'm not opposed to the idea of certification as a qualification, I just want to point out that I think that may mean that they have to have already been an IG somewhere before they become an IG here. It would preclude, I think, the ability to hire somebody who'd been like a deputy IG, perhaps in a larger organization.
You would be able to, I guess, say that they would need to become certified within a specified period of time. Once appointed.
Yeah, obtain and then maintain certification.
Right.
So another question I had, I think that this is okay. I think it's, the sense I have is that it's within the norm, but I was wondering whether the other subcommittee, the structure one, had looked at term. I think the term here is 5 years. I just kind of spot checked myself a couple places and it looks like that's within the realm of what is normal, but I was wondering whether you all actually looked at that issue.
Tom?
Yeah, I don't think we had, because I didn't know we were tasked with that, but I think what the statute says now is initial term of 5 years, and then there can be a second term of 4 years.
My recollection is that's consistent with the organization's sort of recommended
Okay, good,
structure.
good.
Was an initial 5 year and a follow-up 4.
Right. Yeah, again, it's not that I thought it was not good. I just felt that we ought to spend a minute just checking in on that issue.
And can we get a consensus on the 3 to 5 year peer review period? Do we want to say 3 years, 5 years?
I just don't know if I'm missing some practical implication of it. You know what I mean? It's sort of like can we just ask? Can we check with the association maybe? And I just, the 3 to 5 just sort of offends my sensibilities as a, like, what does that even mean? But But I think picking a number is something I don't really feel qualified to do. I just don't know if what makes sense.
If
My
you ever-
recollection is the 3 to 5 was directly pulled again from that association draft. That's where it came from. It was copied verbatim.
I convinced myself, and I could be wrong, that was like a serving suggestion by them, that they weren't saying 3 to 5, they were saying pick one. And
Right.
instead of picking one, the county adopted 3 to 5, right? So I don't
Yep.
know, like, what are the relative merits of 3 or 4 or 5? I'd just like to get some expert advice if someone might say something and we'll go, oh, well, that makes sense. We should definitely do 3, or we should definitely do 4.
Well, it's every 5 years and you're a 5-year term and you could get out without not having a peer review at all.
That is true.
That's what I was looking at as well. So you may want to say 3 years for that reason.
I mean, I'd be fine with 3.
I'm fine with 3.
And if I'm not mistaken, for audits, the peer review period was 3 years, if I'm not mistaken. Okay. So 6 and 7, we've kind of combined it, those. Everybody okay with just combining 6 and 7, accountability and oversight?
Sure.
And then we can just move to, well, 8 is almost a part of that, but this whole idea of an advisory board, I think, let's see, we had some general consensus at our last meeting that we would not recommend the creation of an oversight board, but we did not get beyond that to if there would be any other recommendations relevant to this issue. I don't believe there are other recommendations. Are there any other recommendations with regard to this?
Can I just ask on the oversight question? I don't know what the sense of the chair or the commission is on this, but on something as important as the oversight of the OIG, if we're not making a recommendation, do we simply not make a recommendation, or do we have a section that says a fundamental issue is that came up throughout as a question of oversight, and sort of declare affirmatively why we feel the way we do? I would support something like that. I think sort of just not addressing what was really the subject of a lot of discussion. I think people want to hear about this. It's an important thing to ratify. It's probably the most important thing. So that's not exactly a recommendation. It's more of a status quo, but it's meaningful. Anyway, the thought.
Is it clear what the oversight currently is?
I think there is no, certainly a section like that would have to say that these are the mechanisms for reviewing. You put it in context. These are the mechanisms for removing an IG. They are expiration of his or her term, their removal for cause under section so and so of the code, and these are and these are there as kind of I think I said once earlier, kind of a, I don't know if I said nuclear option or whatever, but there's a presumption that the IG is independent, and only in extreme circumstances does the county have the right to remove him or her. It's kind of been the elephant in the room for a long, for all this time we've been working on it.
So there should be some language you're suggesting around why we're not recommending an oversight board, or that the current mechanisms for oversight we think.
I don't know what this report is going to look like. If I were writing it, I would include it earlier in the report as a fundamental statement of principle, not really among the recommendations, right? I would say one question that came up repeatedly is this, and let us be clear, there are these mechanisms to remove, et cetera, but fundamentally, if the county wants an IG, this is what it means to have an IG. You have limited removal authority because you must maintain independence. And the commission debated it, heard testimony, and concluded there should not be any enhanced oversight. And, so, but I wouldn't like make it recommendation, 11 of 15. I think it's kind of an upfront statement if it were up to me.
Mhm. Okay. Any
And to
disagreement?
your point, it's really not, you said it's extreme circumstances, but the IG is the IG, so maybe it's not so extreme. They're not supposed to take freebies, they're not supposed to do favors, all those things, it's not extreme. So there are ways there are expectations that the IG is following those rules to a T.
So are we in agreement that such a statement as this should be near the beginning of the report? As opposed to being lumped in with recommendations?
I agree.
Any disagreement? Okay. And then the other piece of that was the whole advisory board piece again, and I believe we said no to that. So
I mean, does this even need to be listed? Because the only reason we kind of got to advisory board is because we were looking for alternatives.
the oversight,
Yeah.
right? Yeah, Tom.
I think we need to make it explicit listed because part of the background of this is there was a movement among the county council to create an advisory board, which would be more of an oversight board. And I think we should make clear that we don't think that that should happen. So it should be I would make it a, recommendation.
Okay. So we're recommending that there not be either an oversight or an advisory board. So I don't, perhaps that would be one recommendation instead of two separate.
Yeah, I mean, other to the extent that the peer review may serve, one or more of those functions.
Okay.
Peer review every 3 years.
Okay, so that clarification can be in there. So 8 will kind of go with 7 as we flesh this out in terms of giving some explanation behind or reasoning behind the recommendations. Okay, we have a hard stop at 9 o'clock. And so for this grouping, we're down to number 9, which would be the last one. Ethical climate in Baltimore County overall. This is about the promotion and assessment of ethical behavior among Baltimore County employees and board and committee members. And so we discussed recommending that the ethical climate survey be conducted annually. And while there were concerns about the response rate, we did discuss how conducting it again would allow for this year's results to be a baseline for future surveys to be compared against. And so do we want to recommend that the ethical climate survey be conducted annually using the initial one as a baseline?
I guess what entity would conduct the survey yearly? Would it be, or are we leaving that up to the administration?
My thinking is that we could leave it up to the administration to determine whether or not there is an internal entity they would want to use to do that, or if they want to contract it out to someone else to do that.
I would say I would say if it's contracted out, I mean, we're saying we're leaving it up to them. I think my one concern is the cost. So if it's contracted out, maybe it's not yearly. But if it's something that is done internally where it's Yeah, no position. I'll just take back my comment. Yearly seems good, but again, it's just more if we're paying an outside amenity to come in and do it, I just have concerns about the reoccurring costs yearly.
Mhm.
From a practical perspective, as a survey research person, yearly probably isn't necessary. Every other year probably is sufficient. And yearly actually might reduce response rate because people won't pay attention to it.
For somebody who's on the loop of some of those county survey type of mechanisms, I think the more, when you do them with too much frequency, it just goes straight into the delete box. So I think yearly is too often, whether we specify how frequently or put regularly.
Yeah, I added regular intervals.
Do we need to define regular intervals, or would that become another point of contention? Or I know John doesn't like the 2 to 3 years, but do we need to suggest every 2 to 3 or 2 to 4 years, or just use regular?
How about fixed?
Yeah, I'd be good with regular.
Okay. Okay.
I recommend maybe that they just add a interview, the ability or if someone wants to request an interview or a feedback session with a outside entity, they be given the opportunity.
I'm sorry, an interview or what?
I said feedback session. If they wanted to feedback to clarify what they provided in their survey, they could have the option of getting that interview.
Okay, and so these we will get to the subcommittees again, and if subcommittees can then work on just kind of the wordsmithing of it when we come together again, hopefully on February 2nd, we can finalize this report. Are we in agreement with that?
Yes, sir. When are we going to, what is the actual process to finalize? I mean, these are the recommendations, but the text, all the wrapper, the things that hold it together, all the introductory language, is that coming to us in advance of February 2nd for discussion then as well? Or is that a separate track, just so we know?
Yeah, and do you want to respond to that? My thinking is yes, but let me make sure.
I think so.
Okay.
And we have kind of some thoughts about language for that, and we would also include some of the language from the best practices survey. The best practices analysis included language framing all the issues. So that type of language would be in the body of the report discussing the issues and why they're issues. And then I think the discussion tonight also included some other topics that would go into the draft of the report, kind of some type of statement about principles or beliefs, or that were mentioned earlier, some kind of statement that would go kind of as a preamble to this. But yes, the goal is to have something to prior to that meeting.
Any other questions with regard to that? If not, thank you. I know we're way over time, and in 5 minutes, we're going to evaporate apparently. And so if I can get a motion to adjourn.
I move.
Okay, and then may I have a second?
Second.
Okay, thank you. So with that, the meeting is adjourned. Thank you for giving so much time tonight to this, and we will be in touch with you.